There we go. I think we're recording now. Maybe. Okay, yeah. It always throws me off. So, like, does it click? But then it start flashing for like 3 seconds. That's the problem. But anyways, welcome back to Unplugged Unmuted. Today I have...
Ahmed Nazar.
Nice. What do you do?
I am a PhD student in computer engineering.
What made you want to go to computer engineering?
Well, so interesting story. I actually used to be a design student, and I started off my journey here at Iowa State trying to pursue landscape architecture. And I actually got into the program, but due to a really long story, I had to switch majors due to some scholarship issues, but I switched to computer engineering. I picked computer engineering because even as a kid, I found technology really interesting, just solving puzzles really interesting. So I thought, if I can't do my main passion, I'll still do another main passion, which is ended up being technology-wise. So picked computer engineering. It turned out a lot more fun than I expected, and now we're here, way into the program.
When did you start computer engineering? Like, what year?
I started in fall 2017.
So I graduated high school 2018.
Okay.
So I think you're 1 year ahead of me, but I went to community college that tacked on a year to my college experience, sadly. So for anybody listening to this podcast, don't go to community college if you have the money to expend at a university. That's going to be my 2 cents. Although community college education, I feel, is almost better than university due to the fact that, like, who did you have for computer architecture? 381?
I had Dr. Henry Dewey.
Yeah. Imagine like every professor was like him. That's what community college felt like.
Oh,
Like
wow.
they all genuinely cared. Like,
Okay.
Yeah, he was a very top-notch professor, at least in my opinion. I despise the class, but I love him as a professor. And I'm trying to get him on this podcast.
Hopefully you get him on because he is really passionate about his work. He's an interesting individual. He's got really cool stories. So if you get him on, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, he said he wants to be on, but he's just like super busy. I'm just like, well, yeah, you have a lot going on in your life. But regardless, what has been your favorite computer engineering class?
My favorite computer engineering class is definitely Introduction to Operating Systems, which is CPRE 308.
Really?
Yes, I love that class so much. I actually TA'd for that class, I think 3 or 4 times, and all of those times I was the head TA. And I just love that class. Things just click. Like everything that you learn from freshman year up until that point in your academic career, it just starts to come together, which makes it really interesting. You're like, oh, that's why we do this. Or, oh, that's why we learned that fundamental that was so annoying. And it's just pretty cool.
Yeah, dude, I'm not going to lie. That class was a buzzkill for me. I don't know. The teacher for that class, it just felt like going from Dewey to that professor, it was just kind of like I had such high expectations. And for my experience, the CPRE teachers are great. Every single one of them are better than a lot of the other IT department professors. This is just in my experience. So it's like I have a hard time with the CPRE classes, but the professors are like astronomically better.
Mm-hmm.
At least I enjoy their personalities better and what they study and just their overall charisma. But you have pros and cons to everything.
True.
What would you say your hardest class for computer engineering was?
That's a tough one. There are so many hard classes, which is a good thing because it just allows you to grow and like experience stuff at a different perspective, which helps you as a programmer or just an engineer in general. I would have to say at an undergraduate level, definitely 381. Not because the content was difficult, but because it was such a shock to figure out how to learn everything that you learn in that class at a manageable time that seemed sensible. And also because there's also a lot to do in that class. So you've got labs, you've got projects, you've got homework assignments, and you're learning 2 different languages all at once. And then you're doing another extra homework assignment, which needs you to translate a lot of different things other than the languages that you're already dealing with, which makes it even more of a time consumption. That and trying to balance it out with different classes at the same time. So that I would say would be my most difficult class at an undergrad level. Obviously, there may be more difficult. That's just my perspective. At a graduate level, the most difficult class I've taken is something called fault tolerant systems, CPRE 545, I believe. And the content of that class forces you to think in ways that you didn't know that you could think like that when it comes to like a technical aspect. For example, like if I'm dealing with a system that could break in 1 or 2 steps, how can I figure out all the ways that it could break in those 2 steps and go beyond that to figure out the problem? And it isn't just limited to just, for example, code. Like it isn't just edge cases that will break the code. No. It goes even beyond that. Like for example, just a power cable failure. And you have to think about that. Or like what happens if you get water damage? Or like, for example, everything is perfect in the code, but the person who wired the hardware used the wrong type of wire. And you think about all of these things, which is difficult because you're exposed to these things that you haven't been exposed to before. And at the same time, you learn about it, which is pretty cool.
So you're looking at more of error on more of a hardware aspect?
It's literally everything. You
Really?
think about everything. It's exciting and at the same time overwhelming.
Yeah.
But it's a really good class. I would recommend it to everyone, given that they have enough time to work on it.
How many hours did you plug in a week in that class?
I would say a homework assignment took me on average 5 to 6 hours per 3 or 4 questions, and each homework assignment had around 9 or 10. But all of it is theoretical. You don't actually get to write code. You just think about code, or you think about a hardware system or a software system, and then you get to put all of these concepts together you learn in that class, which makes it really interesting. So it really just pushes the way you think about things, which is great because as engineers, we sometimes tend to basically focus on one thing without taking a step back and seeing things from a different perspective.
Yeah. That class sounds insane. Like you said, 3D1 was like a lot. I mean, you had the labs, you had the projects, you had the quizzes, you had the tests, you had the homeworks. This is one class. And I unfortunately took that class with 4 other classes, including 309. That was a software development project. Or no, that was the software development one. Where it's just like, basically for the listeners, I know you know, but for listeners, it's where you get in a group with 2 to 3 other people and you come up with a design for a software you have to develop throughout the course of the semester. You meet together with a TA once a week or every other week. I can't remember. But you have 2 people doing the front end, so like your UI, your graphics, your stuff like that. And then you have the function calls in the background that the back end has to do. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that does sound right. It's doing 381 with another heavy project class. That's rough. I'm sorry. At the same time, I get it. Sometimes we're just pushed into situations where we'll just have to figure it out and go from there, but it builds our character. However, with 309 and 381 and just all of those project classes, they have a habit of just pushing us into uncomfortable situations.
Yes.
And see how we act. And given not necessarily whether we're obviously correctness is an important aspect, but mostly they're trying to assess, given this area where we don't know anything or we don't know as much about this one specific thing, how can we adapt and push ourselves to learn more and give whoever our user is something manageable and at least friendly.
Yeah. I would say before 2 semesters ago, so last spring semester, I was always like, I don't know where my limit is with like learning and just piling on work.
Mm-hmm.
After February, like around this time last year, almost like this exact week, I I didn't turn on my Nintendo Switch. I didn't turn on my computer. I literally just was on my laptop for 14 hours a day. We're trying to work on stuff. It was so 381, 309, and then I had ethical hacking. That was CPRA 231. Then I had intro to database management systems. Then I had discrete math, CPRA 310.
Great class.
Oh, what a fantastic class. But then I was also working 5-6 hours a week for ITS scanning papers and stuff. So I was like, I'm at my max. I am at 110% right now. I am just dying.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get good grade. I didn't get below a B, but I didn't get great grades. I didn't get on the dean's list, and like I think 3 semesters prior to that, like all in a row, I was getting on the dean's list just fine. But I almost would rather know where my limit is in college rather than trying to get a job where it's like, oh yeah, I can do A, B, C, D, whatever. So at least I'm finding my workload like maximum right now.
Right. I mean, this is a place where we get to discover ourselves at our own pace without anyone kind of like, I guess, without as much consequences as well. Obviously, there are consequences, but they're not as dire like in a formal workplace. Plus, we have so many resources at our disposal that will help us figure out all of these limits and then see if we can push them given our constraints or if we can work within them to see how much we can improve. It's really interesting. It's hard. It's definitely hard, and you can definitely relate to this, how much of a challenge it was to just manage all of that time and have somewhat of a sane sleep schedule too, because that must have been really difficult. Trust me, I get it.
Yeah, I imagine you've been there just as much as I have been, if not more. So speaking of that, what would you say like the hardest time you've had in college was in terms of just like you're just being overwhelmed with what's going on?
So if you ask any of my friends, they will say that, I guess, any of my friends who've known me since undergrad, let me be specific, they'll say that I don't think they've ever seen me in a like rest period for more than a day, which, I mean, it was at the cause of myself, and at the same time, I needed to do specific things in order to get to where I am right now. So, for example, ever since fall 2018, disclaimer before everyone hears this, do not do what I did. It was horrible. Ever since fall 2018, I did 19 credits up until I graduated every semester, while doing a little bit of research and some TAing. Don't do that. If you have any respect for your own social life or mental health, do not do that. I did it just because I had some scholarship issues and they wanted me to graduate by a certain time. And me being me, I wanted to do a lot of extra things that, even though I shouldn't have, just because it would have put me at a higher workload than usual, I still did just because I wanted to explore more of what's available to me given the time that I have. So I guess everything since that point in time, especially the first time I did it, that was a really tough time because I was trying to figure out how to manage my time. At the time, I was taking CPRE 288, which is embedded systems class. You get to program a Roomba. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. That was a fun class.
It is a fun class. And then I was also taking physics 2. So you learn about electromagnetism and then just the physics of electricity and all of that. And then I was taking computer science 228, data structures, which is, it's not a difficult class, but the way it's managed, it makes it really difficult. And the amount of assignments that were given at that class, it's just a ridiculous amount. And then I was also taking a language class. I was taking German. And then I was taking another general ed, which was, I believe, I can't remember but what it was, but I know I was taking 19 credits at the semester at that semester, so that was a tough time trying to figure out how to manage my time at that specific point.
Yeah, 19 credits a semester, dude. I complained about 16 last spring. That was just dogpiling everything on it. But I would say, I don't know, I almost want to say it's good for somebody to experience that overwhelming stress and to really learn how they react under heavy stress. Because it's like you said, it's like this is the time to, with minimal consequences, figure out what you can do, what you can't do, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy. This is the experimental playground. It's like this is where you're figuring out what really works, what doesn't. I mean, granted, you're paying 10 grand a year minimum.
True.
Whether it be through scholarships or financial aid or your parents' money, whatever.
True.
Is the money's coming from somebody.
Right.
So this is a very expensive playground, but that's why it's important. Like look at us now. We're in the SIC, the Student Innovation Center,
Right.
doing podcasting because I'm like, oh, wow, they have a whole room set up for this. This is a sick setup. This is really sick.
It's awesome, especially learning about it. That was an interesting experience.
Yeah. Oh, so do you want to tell the story?
So the story was pretty interesting. Learning about the setup, I mean, what I think happened was the person who was trying to train us was the only person on call who was available to train us the first time. So the story was that we met someone who he was trying his best to show us around the room, but he didn't have as much experience in the equipment as we thought. So he was just going over the absolute generics of everything and how to set everything up to his own knowledge and nothing beyond that. So it was just an interesting experience. So
Yes, for the record, they record the audio and video on either an SD card or they have the opportunity to, you can bring in your own external hard drive, take it home, plug in your computer, and edit it from there. And Ahmed made a smart remark. It's like, well, we're both cyber students. So with security in mind, are we able to bring in floppy disks?
And so after that, the person training us just looked at me confused, and then he said, floppy disks, and just started chuckling, and I just stared at him with a straight face, saying, yeah, we want something secure, so can we use it? And he just goes, well, I'm not sure, but I mean, if you can make it work, go for it.
That would have been sick. Do you know what the max storage is on a floppy disk?
Too little.
Yeah,
Too little.
Yeah, way too little. We'd be flying through them.
Yeah, we'd for like everything up until now, I think we'd be going through like 13 or something.
Yeah. I remember back in high school, I had a teacher who had a floppy disk as like a hall pass.
That's cool.
Yeah. And I just remember I'm like, why? Like, this is an artifact.
I think that's cool.
It is cool, but
because people are going to be like, why are you using a floppy disk? And then you learn about a floppy disk.
yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is neat. I personally never used one. I don't know if you have.
My brother used to have some, but I've never actually seen, or I've never used one physically. But I mean, my brother used to put some computer games on them. So he used to buy some of those video games and then just put them on the computer and then install them and then just game away. And he had a desktop in my room, and at the time the operating system was Windows XP, which, hot take, I think Windows XP is the best OS. I love that. I think it's just nostalgia. It's just a nostalgia,
That's nostalgia.
aspect.
You know how many vulnerabilities are on Windows XP?
Details.
There's a lot. Actually, Windows is the most vulnerable operating system out of the three. Linux is a whole thing. I mean, there's so many operating systems under Linux, but it goes Windows, Mac OS, then Linux. However, this is only because 90% of the world uses Windows.
Okay.
Or, well, maybe I'll say 70. I'll say 20% Mac OS. Maybe I actually don't know these numbers, but it makes sense to me because 90% of computers I see are Windows based.
Right.
And it only comes into like very corporate levels where it's Linux, like for servers and stuff like that.
Right.
But even then, you have Windows servers, but I don't know, Ubuntu servers are still nice too. I
Right.
prefer Linux when it comes to actually setting up, telecommunications or just making machines work together, or whether it be a web server or Active Directory, stuff like that. I don't know if you know what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
with you on that. Could you tell me about the vulnerabilities of XP
Of XP?
or why in general, other than that amount of people using it, why Windows would have more vulnerabilities compared to the others? Especially,
Well,
or I guess compared to Linux, because that's kind of
compared to
like
Linux.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm learning in operating system security right now, CPRE 440. And do you have a lot of familiarity with Linux?
Yeah.
Okay. So for the viewers, there's this thing called chmod where you can change the access privileges of a specific file or directory or folder, really anything. Everything's a file in Linux. And you can change who has access to it, who can edit it, who can execute it. It's in order read, write, execute. So you can change whether it's the user who created it or the group that user falls into. Like, let's say you are a business administrator, and do you want all the other business administrators to see your social security profile or your banking information? Or do you want that to be only accessible to you, or do you want everybody on the computer to see it? So it's like you have to put these things in mind. It's very easy to change this stuff on Linux. However, on Windows, it's very complicated. I think it's called access something entries. But it goes, there's different, it's like cards. It's like different rules for things. So it's like, it'd be like, oh, I want this group to have access to this, but out of this group, I want this person to have access. But the way you order it can change which is triumphant over the other. So it's very interesting to see how these things work. And I'm like, well, no wonder why people like Linux more if you have to freaking do all this sorting and stuff rather than just be like, oh, well, the user made it. It should just be the user who gets to access it or whatever. It's like you're setting so many rules in place just for one thing when it could just be, oh, chmod, whatever you want.
Interesting. I didn't know about that Windows aspect. I thought it was just more like a hierarchy. I didn't think about the ordering that much. I thought it was just like Linux, where if you had one group or one specific user, that you're good. But I didn't think about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And that was like one of the first things we learned in the class. I'm like, oh, this makes sense why they're only teaching us Linux really with a very high level computer engineering courses, and even like cybersecurity classes. Like I'd say my go through of it, but now I'm going to be a TA and stuff for like the lower cyber classes. They're bringing in more Windows systems. It's like for me, it's like, sure, you can teach people how to secure a Linux machine, but it's like, let's say you go into a corporate setting and you're like, hey, I need to secure the systems. I guarantee you 80% of those computers are going to be Windows.
Right.
If you're trying to secure a call center or a bank, you think a banker is going to be working on a Linux machine?
Probably not.
No, I highly doubt that. So it's like, when I was taking the class, I'm like, well, how is this applicable to the real world? So that was kind of like my main complaint with it, but now I get to be a TA and go through the labs again. So I'm like, this is sweet. It's like taking the class again, and I'm getting paid for it.
Right, and then you also get to see other people learn about this, and you also learn with them new things because they might have a perspective on this new thing that you didn't even think about, which to me, given that I've TA'd multiple classes over a couple of years, I've learned more being a TA than a student, which is really interesting because you have to learn the material to become a TA. But going through the different ways that people understand things and how they see things or go about a problem, it's just really interesting. And it just shows you that one way of doing things is not really the best way or not really the only one way to do it. There's no right way of doing things. There's just multiple ways of doing things, which I think is really cool. And you get to discover that as a TA too.
Yeah.
Or just just teaching anyone in general. Like if you can teach someone that you've learned over a lot of years or a long period of time in just a few sentences and they understand it, that means you're doing a good job and you fully understand what you're doing. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think the coolest thing for me is seeing, at least with Iowa State, to me, Iowa State is a big mixing salad, like just a big mixed salad. You have people from everywhere. So you get all these different cultural influences on how people think about stuff, enumerate their way through a problem. Like, for example, if you wanted to say where you're from and give a little background on that.
Sure. I am originally from Kuwait, which to some people who don't know or haven't heard of it, it is a little country in the Middle East. So if you look at a map and you look for Saudi Arabia and you look for Iraq, there's a tiny little country that looks like an eagle head. Zoom in, and that's Kuwait. Which, interesting fact, Iowa, the state of Iowa, is 5 times bigger in landmass than Kuwait. But the population of Kuwait is 4 million, whereas here it's, I think, what? How many? I don't know. At least.
Not 4 million.
Okay. I don't know the actual number, but I mean, for a small country, 4 million is a lot.
Yeah, I would guess. I think Des Moines has between 250 and 300,000.
Okay.
So I'd say ballpark a million.
Okay.
So, yeah. And you said Iowa's 4 or 5 times larger?
Yes, by landmass.
So, holy cow.
Yeah.
That is close quarters.
Yep.
So tell me what life is like over in Kuwait.
Okay. So Kuwait is a Middle Eastern country, right? And as I just mentioned, that the population over there is 4 million. What's interesting about the population, if you just cut it exactly in half, you'll get 2 million people who are Kuwaiti, which means people from Kuwait. And then you have 2 million people who are just people from different cultures and different countries, which I think is amazing. Because when you think about it, you're like, oh, it's exactly split in half. And that's great because you have such a different mix of cultures. Life there, because of that, is very diverse, right? So obviously you just have Arab culture. And because it is a Middle Eastern country, and this goes in general, what I'm about to say for most Asian countries, and I'm not trying to generalize, but this is just like how culture is perceived on that side of the globe. The emphasis on the we as opposed to the I. Like, for example, in Western countries, most people that I've met who are from Western countries, they always say or think about their goals. I'm just bringing up a really good or really easy example that can be relatable to anyone. They always think about, I want to achieve this, or I want to achieve this position in this specific workplace, or I want to meet this specific person, which is valid. Like this sort of notion is everywhere. Whereas in Asian countries or Middle Eastern countries, especially where I'm from, the emphasis is, oh, I want to get to this position so that my family or the people who are close to me can see me as successful so that I can thank them with my success. So that's a really good emphasis on the we, if that makes sense, as opposed to the I. And because of that, life in Kuwait is very like group oriented and family oriented. So even close friends, you can just call them as family, and they just act as family too. So the main aspect there is that it really is just a big city. So if you imagine any big city here in the US, think about that, but just apply Arabic culture to it. So that's a really good summary, I think, of how life is in the Middle East, especially Kuwait. So that answers your question.
So what's the schooling like there for Like, let's say between the ages of 5 and 18, 17.
That depends on what your, I guess, parents want, obviously. So I went to a private school, generally speaking, where a young Kuwaiti kid would go to, is a public school. And what's interesting there is they have a segregated rule. So you've got public schools that are for boys only, or segregated school for girls only. And this is for public schools in general. Whereas some private schools, they have a mix, and that's okay. So I went to a private British school, and that was a mix. So I went there all from kindergarten up until the equivalent of 12th grade. So I graduated a year early, which was why I say the equivalent of 12th grade. And it just prepares, I guess the school that I went to, it prepares you for how to access and deal with college life before even going into college life, which SATs here do kind of do that. But with my experience in that school, they kind of prepared me a lot more towards that with how they pushed me. So on the other hand, with public schools, the main language that they teach in is Arabic as opposed to English. And English is a supplementary course, so you learn it as a second language. So everything from math to science to social sciences, art, everything is taught in Arabic in public schools. So people who go to public schools in Kuwait and they want to go to a university outside of Kuwait, what they usually do is they take a year of language studies, which is English, obviously, to try to learn it as a native speaker or as close to a native speaker as possible so that they're not in as much of a culture shock when going into the big name classes. So that's how schooling goes, mostly in Kuwait. It really depends on where you go to. That doesn't mean that people who go to public schools are at a disadvantage. But I would say that the English courses there are actually pretty good, just not as extensive.
In the public schools or the private ones?
Public schools. So, hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So I'm assuming with 4 or 5 times less mass sizes Iowa, with 4 million people, do you have like friends that had like a vastly different learning curve than you in terms of like let's say they went to public school or a different private school? Like, does it vary that much between like subject, quality of teaching?
Honestly, it doesn't. It's really just the barrier of I'm learning, for example, algebra in English. They're learning it in Arabic. The only translation is that the Greek letters are the same. So it's really just the same material. It's just taught in a different language. So the difficulty that you would probably find is, like, for example, if they're trying to explain something to you and you're trying to explain something to them, it just becomes into a conversation of how can I explain it so that you can understand it in both our native languages without making each other feel stupid. Like,
Right.
Like, I hate to say that, but it just feels that way, especially when you're growing up. But looking back at it, you're like, oh, it's just because we learned this thing in 2 different languages, even though it's the same thing. So I guess that's the biggest barrier that I can think of. Otherwise, it really is just the same quality of education. It's just at a different pace and a different language.
That's interesting. Do you know what the private school cost would be like in US dollars for a year?
So this is an estimate based on when I went to school. I don't actually know if this is still the same or not. I'm going to guess it just went up in price just because of how things are going around the world.
Yeah.
I would say, so for the private school that I went to, you would pay per term. So, and a term
Is half a semester.
Yes. So that would be, it was expensive. It was 2,000 KD, which is roughly $6,000. Yes, it is expensive.
24,000 a year?
Yes. It's ridiculous. expensive.
Holy cow, dude. Because what, how much is Iowa State? Is it?
For international students as an undergrad, I believe it shoots between 14 and 17K for a semester. As for, I think, residents as an undergrad, I think it's 10K, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm still complaining about that, and you're just like, I'm used to expensive schooling. Like, that's hardcore, dude. So, do you feel the private school is worth it in your experience?
I definitely think that it was worth it. I learned a lot, and I definitely was prepared, I guess, I was prepared more for the college life at a younger age, as opposed to where I would have been with a public school. I think the public schools are more lax just because of how things are going for them, and they don't have as much of a responsibility compared to, I would compare it to like something like the SATs. Like when it comes to when they're graduating semesters, their responsibility when it comes to exams is not equivalent to the pressure of an SAT. It's more just like an end of year exam, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So whereas at the private school that I went to, the exams that I took before graduating, they were called AS exams, which are just like the SATs. I don't know which one is more difficult or which one is easier, but I know they're at the same level roughly. So everyone in the world has to take the same exam at the same time. Yeah, let that sink in.
Yeah, that's a lot of exam takings going on at the same time.
Yep. So that preparation for taking an exam at a specific time and making sure to get that right on the first time, it's difficult. So it really just prepares you ahead of time for what you're going to do at college.
Yeah.
Plus, the quality of it was extremely high from my perspective, because also the difficulty was pretty high from my perspective at that time. So I thought it was pretty good. It definitely prepared me really well for college. So
I guess what a resident Iowan would say is, why Iowa? Why not like California, Florida, New York, East Coast, West Coast? But you just chose like, oh, we're gonna do 3 hours west of Chicago or 5 hours west of Chicago.
I chose Iowa because, based on my introduction of Kuwait earlier, it is just a big city. It's loud, there's a lot going on, and also because it's just condensed, right? I chose Iowa because I wanted quiet. Also because the ranking of the colleges that I was interested in, at the time it was design and now it's computer engineering, they're still high compared to other public schools in the U.S. and comparatively of all colleges in the U.S., they were still ranked pretty high. So I thought I'm getting a good education. Plus, the campus here is really beautiful. We have one of the largest art collections, public art collections, available to view on our campus, which I think is great. And at the time, I saw that as inspiration to just like be using my resources at my disposal.
Yeah, there are a lot of resources at students' disposal. Like I said, this podcasting room that I think you can do glass blowing, 3D printing, textiles and composites and stuff. This building has a lot to offer, and it sucks like that. I'm now like just utilizing it during my last semester. I'm like, it sucks. But I mean, you live and learn. But I'd say to anybody that goes to Iowa State, what would you say is your one piece of advice for them?
Don't be afraid to take your time, and don't be afraid to explore more. Often when we're at a time where we're just starting something, we're just afraid of experiencing something new. Like, for example, a really easy example to think about is if you're leaving your apartment and you're taking the same path every single day, that's something that you just get used to. But in order for you to get to use that path that you were so used to, you had to start somewhere, which at the time was discomfort. So you started somewhere to get to a path which you're used to. Don't be afraid to apply that for everything that you're experiencing.
I like that. That's a good one.
Thank you.
So I guess the thing that interested me most about like you as a person is in your Instagram bio. I think it says dreamer and surrealist.
Yes.
Where does that come from?
So I am extremely ambitious. I like to think big and I like to make progress towards those big things. I say dreamer because I like to make my dreams a goal. So when I say dream, I actually mean goal. And to other people, those dreams can be just very whack or crazy, hence the surrealist part. One of my favorite artists is called Salvador Dali, and he makes art that's made in a style called surrealism. So you've just got, for example, one of his most famous paintings is the Persistence of Memory, which is just the melting clocks in the desert. That's surrealism. So I related my dreams to something that's so out of the ordinary that it gives me more of a motivation to just go ahead and do them and make them real.
I see. Do you have anything else other than your coffee business?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
What's on the agenda?
Honestly, where I see myself going is I want to open up my own company. And in that company, I want to work on some biomedical solutions within the application of my own research within my PhD studies. So just as a general summary of what my research is, I try to improve communication within a area using LiDARs and cameras. So basically how to incorporate these two sensors into one and just how to understand the modeling of my environment and try to improve communication within that. So where I'm going with that is how do I apply my biomedical background into that and then open up a company with that. And then after that, I want to actually go back and get a degree in design and see how I can put all of these three things into one. That's where I see myself. So the coffee business is just a start to get to that. How is it a start? Just as a start for something to help me get financially stable in order to achieve that.
How much, if you don't mind me asking, how much revenue have you pulled in with the coffee business?
So it's still really slow, and just because of how small it is so far. And I would say about 300, 400 bucks in the past 3 months that I've worked on it. And it's based on how many people who bought it. I think that's pretty good, especially for something that I just started on a whim and was like, I think this is pretty cool. I can't find, so summary of my business, it's a Arabic coffee business. So I'm from the Middle East, right? And I tried to find some Arabic coffee on Amazon or just anywhere that sells coffee. And I realized how expensive it was. And also, it wasn't a good quality. So I thought to myself, I'm Arabic. I understand how to make coffee. Why don't I just make my own? And then so I started experimenting, buying the equipment, and I actually made great success in how my coffee tastes. And I was like, oh, maybe I can sell this. And maybe someone else is having the same thought as me of like, oh, these coffee products on Amazon or any of the other providers of Arabic coffee don't feel like home. But this person is providing something that feels like home. Maybe I should get from them. So that's my aim with this coffee business. And I think I made a good job of capturing that home feeling. Obviously, that's different for everyone, but I think I got a good idea of it.
Well, should we try it?
Sure.
Get a little taste test going on here.
Sure. Also, while I'm pouring this is part of culture. So this pouring method, so I'm using my left arm to pour into a cup in my right hand. This is a polite way of pouring in the Middle East. it would be actually disrespectful to do it opposite.
Really?
Yes. The reason for that is if you were to shake someone's hand, you would use your right hand as a dominant hand to shake someone's hand. If you were to basically hand something to someone, you would use a right hand. So basically how you're gesturing or what you're using to give something to someone or how you're interacting with someone, using your right hand is a polite way of doing it. So if I were to pour you something and give it to you with my left hand, it's kind of like I'm disrespecting you.
That's interesting.
It is.
Are there any more nice cultural norms?
Yes. So, for example, if you are a guest at my house for the first time and I invite you to lunch, it would be disrespectful of me to eat before you or serve myself before I serve you. And if you're not done and I leave the table, that would be extremely rude. And I'm supposed to give you more than you should eat. So
it feels like a typical modern grandma in America.
Yep.
It's like, eat up. Are you sure you don't need more? You look like you're about to explode, but here's more.
Yep, eat some more. And then everything is a 6-course meal for exaggeration purposes. So you get like an appetizer, you get salad, and then you get a huge meal. And then after that is dessert, and then there's post-dessert, then there's coffee, which is where this comes in.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Arabic coffee?
Arabic coffee.
So why does the coffee come last?
Because, well, I mean, it wouldn't be really nice to have, like, for example, something with beef and rice with coffee. It just gives you a really weird palate. So you give it after the meal as kind of like a dessert complementer. So that's where it goes nice. And then it just also helps digest the food because caffeine is a diuretic. It helps increase your blood flow. So that's one way.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like this should always be like an appetizer.
Coffee?
Yeah. Because at least in American culture, how I perceive it is it's a breakfast complimentary thing.
I see.
So you have it with your donut in the morning or your cereal, or you just have your coffee, you call it a day because you're like, I don't eat much in the morning. Like, that's how I'm getting. Like, I'm just starting to eat at like 1 p.m. because I wake up at like 9:30.
Mm-hmm.
Then I just get what I need ready for the day. Then I go to my class. Then I come home and eat. But I don't know. I haven't had too much coffee lately, honestly. So
There's no such thing.
For what?
Too much coffee.
True. I feel like, are you ever worried about like kidney stones or anything?
Always, which
Oh.
is why I try to drink at least 2 liters of water every day because I drink a lot of coffee.
So just drinking 2 liters of water helps break down.
It's not that it helps break down, it also just keeps you hydrated in general. So because I said caffeine is a diuretic, you're just going to be dehydrated even after just a small sip. So it's always important to at least keep replenishing and refreshing your body with water, but not too much water. 2 liters is just the word of advice that everyone says, drink 2 liters of water every day because that's the healthiest. So just doing that should be fine.
That's interesting. My rule of thumb is half your body weight in ounces.
Interesting.
Because I feel like that's more proper. Because it's like, let's say you have a girlfriend who's 100 pounds, and like, let's say you're a bodybuilder and you weigh 250. Totally different size, 2 different sizes of people right there.
Right.
So I feel, well, this guy is obviously going to need more protein to keep up with what he's doing compared to his girlfriend. So, I mean, granted, we're all like, what, 70% water or something like that?
Yes.
So I feel as a person grows and shapes to whatever size they end up being, the requirements change.
Right.
So that's been the most solid thing I've ever heard for water. Half your body weight in ounces. However, in summer, I try and get like, it depends what I'm doing, right? So if it's like, if I'm very active, I'm sweating a lot, whatever, I'll try and do 1.5, which, like, I remember back in my blue collar job, I'd just take in a gallon of water because I'm like, I don't care. Like, I know I'm going to blast through this today.
Right.
But it was always like lukewarm by the end. It was just terrible. I'm an ice cold water type of guy, especially when it's like overheating in the factory and stuff. You're like, gotta stay cool, man. But
Yeah, I don't blame you at that point.
yeah. Did you have any interesting jobs while you were in Kuwait, or was it just solely schoolwork?
So it was actually after I graduated that I got somewhat of a part-time job, but at the same time, immediately after I graduated, I started applying for colleges. So the job was, my brother worked as a manager of a tailoring service as his part-time job, and more on the managing the business side, like how to interact with customers, how to improve the business model, and so on. And he basically employed me based on my photography skill, and basically he wanted me to improve my social media skills. So he employed me as a social media manager, and I would take photos of basically the pieces that were made by the workers in the tailoring service, and then I would promote them on Instagram and try to interact with customers as much as possible. And that taught me a lot at an early age of what kind of people to deal with at a digital level, because everyone has a different persona at a digital level that they're trying to show, and also just how to promote something to a small amount of people as opposed to everyone, because not everyone will like one thing and someone will always like that one thing.
Right.
So yeah, that taught me a lot. It actually helped me with my coffee business because it allowed me to find an audience. And it also allowed me to basically grow as a person and increase my social interactions at a digital level, and then slowly apply it in my physical real world level.
Yeah. Well, speaking of coffee, I feel like, so what's the cultural norm to drink this? I'm trying to follow all the norms for this. Is there anything I need to do?
Just enjoy it.
Just enjoy it. Is it like take it like a shot or?
No. You can just
Sip
sip. You can just sip on it.
I'll
It's
try
going to be a
sip.
little bit hot. So while Orion is drinking this, for anyone who has not heard or tried Arabic coffee, the base of the coffee is just Yemeni beans or Ethiopian beans. For this one, I used Yemeni beans. And on top of the base, you use some spices. In this case, it was cardamom, cloves, and I believe it's pronounced anise. I'm saying it in an Arabic way. I don't know what it's actually called in English.
I have no idea.
I know in English it's called anise, Anise, but I don't know how it's pronounced. So if I'm butchering it, I'm sorry. So all of these spices, the most important one is cardamom because that just gives it the kick. And then also, compared to regular coffee, so take your light, medium, dark roast, or just think of any pour over coffee, which is dark brown. This one is roasted at a lower temperature for a lot less time. So in order for coffee to get that dark brown color that you're usually used to, it's roasted at a higher temperature for longer periods of time. This one is roasted at a lower temperature for lower periods of time, hence why it looks very earthy. So for the people who are listening, Arabic coffee is more of or traditional Arabic coffee is more of a light brown, yellowish color. So think of sand, for lack of a better description. Whereas regular coffee, it's more like
I'd say like a caramel color.
caramel color.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. So in terms of taste, because of how much you're roasting the coffee, it will have a earthy taste. So people who don't have as good of a description of taste palettes, think of green tea. So green tea is very grassy, right? So that would be typically called earthy taste. So take that, but with a sprinkle of coffee taste.
Yeah, it's a very interesting flavor, and part of me wants to say I really, really like it.
Are you
But-
just saying that?
No,
or-
no. Like, it's like I'm unsure how to feel about it, but it's definitely not bad.
Right.
It's definitely an acquired taste, and like genuinely, this is something I would probably drink on a regular basis, just because, well, one, more caffeine because it's a light roast,
Right.
And two, it's just cool. You're just like, yeah, I'm drinking Arabic coffee.
Right. What's also interesting about this is, so right now it's plain. So it's just the coffee and water. Some people like sweeter notes in their coffee. So what they would usually do is there is a product called a powdered creamer. I think that's what it's called here in English.
Yes.
And basically what you would do is you take that powdered creamer, and then as you're brewing your batch of coffee, you just include it in your batch and then just mix it in, and then they'll just brew with the coffee, and you would get a little bit of a sweeter coffee taste with just a little bit of creamer. It makes sense. I personally like my coffee straight just because I enjoy the taste of coffee, but some people like sweeter things.
Yeah. No, I like, for different purposes, I'll drink a sweet coffee. Like if I want a sweet coffee, it's meaning I'm wanting a sweet tooth, kind of just, I need to like satisfy that craving for the moment. But like if I just want straight black coffee, I like black coffee because it's like a sucker punch. It's very strong. It's like, hey, wake up.
Right.
You have the caffeine, and you have, it's like a metaphorical cold shower. It's like, it's like,
Yep.
it's not the greatest taste in the world,
Nope.
but it's genuinely not really supposed to be. It's supposed to me, coffee's supposed to wake you up. That's how I've always perceived coffee.
Right. I remember my first espresso shot, and it was at actually my uncle's house. And it was from a machine called Nespresso, which, to those who don't know, is just a capsule-based machine, kind of like a Keurig, but specializes only in espresso. So I had my first one. I took a sip out of it and just spat it out. And then immediately after, so espresso shots usually are about 30 milliliters, which is about 1 ounce, I think. 1 ounce. So
Yeah, that sounds right.
I put 5 sugar cubes in that 1 ounce cup just so that I could drink it. And then eventually slowly remove the sugar, and then I could just drink espresso now like a champ.
Nice. I'm assuming espresso is extremely bitter.
It's not that it's bitter, it's just concentrated coffee taste because there's less water.
True. I don't know if I've tried just straight espresso.
It's interesting. It's worth a try.
Yeah, I would, because I know like Starbucks puts, you can be like, oh yeah, give me an espresso shot, whatever, and that's what has that darker flavor to it. But I don't know, I'm trying to wean off Starbucks like permanently. It's like, to me, that's not coffee. That's sugar in a can.
If I were to describe Starbucks, I would say it's more convenient than good. It's right there. If you want something quick and you're too lazy to make your own coffee, it's right there. It's arguably, given the options that we have in Ames, or I guess the options that we have near Iowa State University and Central Campus, it is the best option compared to like Dunkin' Donuts or the university campus coffee. But if you were to go outside of Central Campus, there's Scooter's Coffee, which I think is a lot better. It's still a chain, but it's still a lot better than Starbucks.
You know what you could try? You
What?
could try to sell Arabic coffee to scooters.
That's a good idea. I don't know how it will work with a chain, but we'll see.
You could try to just be like, hey, this is local. You want to support local? I mean, granted, are you actually sourcing the beans from like Yemen and Ethiopia, or is that just are they like imported to?
They're imported. So there's a website that I get raw beans from, and then I just roast them at home and make them into the coffee. So traditionally speaking, most of the Arabic coffee beans come either from Yemen or Ethiopia. Ethiopia being like one of the lead coffee growers in the world, just because of how that is. And with Yemen, just because it has more of that earthy taste than usual. So that's where we source it from. So I use this website to get the raw beans, which are usually called either green coffee beans or raw coffee beans. And after that, basically put them in a fancy popcorn machine. That's what I like to describe it. And then roast them to get the Arabic coffee.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
How long? So, what's your production timeline for? Well, obviously you have to obtain them, and then what's like your manufacturing part of it?
So really all I'm doing is as soon as I start roasting them, I can just go and do whatever I want elsewhere as it's roasting, because it's really just taking its time and cooking for like a common term that you can think of. And then after it's done, all I'm doing is just grinding it and mixing it with the spices. So it really doesn't take up that much time as you might think. But going forward, the brewing time actually takes more effort than the roasting, even though the brewing takes less time, because you want something that's as close to perfect or as close to the home feeling for me in that cup. So the roasting doesn't really affect me that much in terms of manufacturing. It's really just the brewing and how do I get the product as best as possible.
This is a one-man operation?
Yes.
Nice. Just like this podcast. But, how big are you trying to grow this thing? That's my $1 million question for you.
I want to try to have it be available. I wanted to have it available across the United States for just Arabic students who miss home and want to try Arabic coffee that feels like home. And also just for people who are interested in coffee and want a different taste than the regular black coffee. Like, that's my target audience, and where I want it is just nationwide. So we're starting slowly with just county-wide and cities and statewide, but slowly trying to grow that further and further.
I think you should go to scooters. That'd be huge, dude.
You're right. I mean, it's a really good idea. I just don't know how the chains are going to take it, but it's worth a try.
You could try Clyde's.
Clouds? Oh, yeah.
Clyde's.
Where's that?
Clyde's?
Oh, Clyde's. Clyde's.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like a Starbucks mixed in with like a, I don't know, it feels like a steak and shake. Jace was like, hey, Starbucks, let's start up a thing.
Okay. I'll keep that on my notes.
That's right under UDCC.
Okay.
That's like, like the convenience store. It's literally to the left of that.
Yeah. It's the one that's kind of like as soon as you go in, you'll see it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's actually a pretty good idea. Thank you for suggesting that. Appreciate it.
It's all ideas. Is like, it's always a no until you ask.
Right.
So, and I firmly like that quote a lot. It's like with this podcast, like I was asking decently big name bands on like the home team. They're pop punk from Washington, and they have 300,000 monthly listeners. And I just reached out to them like, hey, I'm starting out this podcast, and this is like, there's gonna be like episode 5 that they're gonna be on.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, we'll do it. I'm like, all right.
Sure. That's awesome.
It was really sick. And then they came through. Their first Iowa show was at the M Shop.
Okay.
And I'm like, what are the odds? What are the odds of that? Like,
Right.
why the M Shop?
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah, like why not Des Moines or Iowa City or Cedar Rapids or some, any other city other than Ames. But it was super sick, dude. Then I got to go see them, and then they recognized me like, hey, dude, how's it going? Whatever. And got to talk to him and get stuff signed by them. So that was sick.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of quotes, I really like that quote where you said it's always a no unless you ask. That's actually pretty nice. Another quote that resonates, or I actually read or I heard this last month in a podcast actually, and it was self-care comes from comfort, and discomfort brings self-respect, which if you think about it, going forward, like if you put yourself in, or you are in a uncomfortable situation and you're trying to navigate your way out of it, it allows you to reassess your own boundaries and reassess your own potential throughout your mental ability and just how to go through about this, whether you're enjoying it or not, whether you want this to happen again. it really builds up your idea of self-respect. Whereas in comfort, you already know all of these things and you're already trying to appeal to what you're used to. So that's where I really like the quote where self-care is comfort and then discomfort brings self-respect. I like that a lot.
I like one of my favorite motivators of all time. His name's Dan Pena. And he's like, every day you should be doing something that you're not comfortable with, but that helps with self-growth, whether it be, he's like, fuck it, go skydiving, right? Just, you're scared of heights, go skydiving. Overcome, it's like, you don't need to be scared of heights. You don't need to be scared of whatever it be in life that's stopping you from doing something that could be, once in a lifetime experience. And I love that. It's like Dan Pena, I would say, was not as controversial as Andrew Tate, but still has that same mentality where he's very proactive about what he believes in.
Right.
And I kind of like that. I like people who are up and at 'em, have a very intense personality, but are also very successful.
Yeah.
And that's, I feel like 90% of leaders in, financial status, they accept Elon Musk. Elon Musk is kind of like the outlier. He's just kind of, he deals with Asperger's. So that it just kind of brings a swing into a different aspect of how he runs stuff. Although he still has very similar traits to Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Bezos.
Right.
People don't like the people who are super rich because sadly you have to be that rich. You do have to, unfortunately, take advantage of people and situations.
Right.
But without those innovators, what would we have?
Exactly.
Right. So it's like that's how I look at it. It's like if you make 10 people, 20 people, or even 100,000 people mad for the benefit of millions,
right?
I'd take those odds.
Right.
And sure, that might not be the best thing to say, but innovation has to happen somehow.
Right.
And it's not a streamlined process. Innovation is you have a loop-de-loop here, you have an upside-down disconnected bridge here. You got to somehow jump over that disconnected bridge, get to the next step. And it's a mess.
Right.
But to overcome these challenges, it's very interesting to see how these people just build these teams to like help them.
Right.
And the book I'm reading listening to right now is the Steve Jobs biography. And they are not dumbing it down at all for how crude he could be.
Right.
Have you listened to it at all?
I have not.
It's a great read. And I will share it with you if you'd like.
Sure.
There's a little cool thing that's probably not ethical, but I will show you after the podcast.
Sure.
I can share any Audible thing for free.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'll be sure not to check it out.
Yeah, don't check it out. Don't even think about checking it out to any viewers out there. Do not go against Audible's terms of service. We're not doing anything after the podcast. Anyways, so Steve Jobs, like his interview process for like early on Apple, because he was like the sales guy and Wozniak was the real engineer behind most Apple products.
Yeah.
Well, Wozniak was like, we're just going to give these, chipboards to our friends, whatever. They can play around with them. And Steve Jobs was like, no. We are going to sell these things for 5 to 6 times the price of what we paid for them. Because you guys get paid for your labor, your smart, your ethics, all this stuff. And that's how the Apple One boards, all this stuff starts coming out. And at the time, I want to say Wozniak was working at Intel, and Steve Jobs really went to Wozniak's parents' house crying, saying, you have to get him to come work with me. We need him. He's just the best engineer I know, da-da-da-da. And his parents were even like, yeah, Wozniak, you gotta leave Intel and go work at Apple. This is going to be the next best thing. And after some convincing, they finally got Wozniak back on board. And, they would do co-interviews. Just imagine you and me in a thing. You could say I'm the wild card out of both of us, but Steve Jobs would be like, well, how much LSD have you done in your life? I'm not even kidding.
Interesting.
He loves seeing people uncomfortable.
Right.
And like we said earlier in this podcast, you want to see how someone reacts in an uncomfortable situation.
Yeah.
Because if they know everything, nobody knows everything.
Nope.
So to see how someone reacts in a situation where they don't know something, that's important. So, and then he'd even go as far and crude as be like, well, when's the last time you had sex or whatever? It's so outlandish. He just want to see them squirm.
Right.
And then when Wozniak was doing the technical interview, he'd be making like chicken, just clucking. Just cluck, 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 walking around the room and doing like a little chicken dance or whatever. And he made so many people leave, but he's like, I don't care. Like Steve Jobs knew he was a loose cannon, but he also had these things called like distorted reality visions where he would just deny something wasn't real. Like if something, like imagine you came up to me and you're like, hey, I have this really cool idea for the podcast, whatever. And basically, this is not me berating you right now. This is just how Steve Jobs would talk to people. He's like, why the fuck are you even wasting your time on that?
Right.
But if a week later he still liked that idea, he would present it like I present it back to you. I'm like, Ahmed, don't you think this is a great idea? And you're like, that's literally what I told you last week. He'd be like, yeah, whatever. But anyways, do you think we should go through with it? He's a very interesting character, but without him, I mean, I wouldn't have my iPhone or anything.
That's true. Yeah.
We wouldn't have GUI-based applications. Apple made those. They switched from CLI command line interface to graphical user interface. That was their idea. The mouse was their idea. Touch screens were their idea. They had a lot of good ideas.
Right.
But competition drives innovation. So seeing how Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, they're actually like becoming friends and stuff. And he was like, hey, Bill, I don't want you to be buddy-buddy with IBM anymore. So let's do like some contract stuff. So he'd be like, well, we want our version of Excel too. But you can't be giving IBM any stuff. So they like be signing contracts and stuff. So that's basically how IBM got phased out of like, consumer-based PCs and stuff like that, which is very interesting.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I just kind of heard about. Like, I'm still like 17 hours left to this Audible, but I love it. I love listening to like how the IT powers of the world really got on their feet and stuff. Because I don't know if I've told you, but I do want to make my own smart home business someday where it's very privacy based. Mm-hmm. No cameras, GPS or microphones, nothing. Nothing goes on the internet. Nothing.
Interesting. I'm curious to see how you're going to do that. That'd be pretty cool to see. I'm excited actually now. Let's go.
Yeah, local area network based. You can't hack it unless you're in the house. Uh-huh. Because now what I'm learning in Intro to Wireless Security, shout out to you for being my TA in that class, is directional antennas. So you can just isolate. Because what I was thinking before, I'm like, well, how am I going to cancel out the opportunity for a signal to escape the house? Well, just directional antennas.
Yep.
Because before I had just a stupid idea now. Now that I think back to it, but it's like putting it in like the drywall and insulation and stuff. Just put like sheets of aluminum, like just like aluminum foil, because a signal cannot propagate itself through metal.
Right.
It just bounces off. So nobody would be able to do an internal or an external attack on the network, and nobody would be able to talk to the outside world from the inside. So it's basically a physical VLAN. Like, it's just not going to talk to anything else.
Right.
But now I'm like, just do directional antennas. Like, it's really not that complicated.
Right.
So it's cool that going into wireless security, but it's like, so I'm trying to figure this out. Like, how am I going to, well, one, it's like, let's say, I don't know, if you do everything local, you can't do subscription-based. And subscription-based is the most successful business model right now.
Right.
That's why a lot of games are going free to play, then with a battle pass system or gold pass, whatever you want to call it. So then you have all these cosmetic things. But in a business sense, I'm trying to think, how can I keep it profitable? Like, I want to make a quality product, not one that's used after a place every 5-10 years. I want it's like, it's installed, it's done. Like, that's just it, which is going to be hard. So it's like, what, you do a lifetime warranty or something?
Right.
But the local area network, I want it to be like an iPad hooked up to a Raspberry Pi so you can control all the different peripherals and everything. So like one thing I want to do is, like, imagine this doorway back here. You're walking in the door. You have two sets of like a laser and then a light receptor. And just imagine it's like a cat laser pen. So once you break that beam connection, like you're walking through the door, Obviously, the light receptor's gonna be like, hey, we're not getting the light anymore. Something's going on. But the the laser pen's still on. So someone must be coming in or out of the room. How do you tell the direction? You just set up 2 sets of them. Then you label number 1, then the second one, number 2. So whichever one's triggered first, you can detect which way someone is entering or leaving the room, correct? And people are like, well, how are you going to keep track of like how many people are in the room? You don't want one person to leave, then the other 3 people are left from the dark. But you just keep a counter on.
Right.
I'm like, that's pretty simple, easy fix. But now I'm trying to figure out this. I feel like this should have been the first thing. I thought, well, what happens when the door opens? Because most doors are on a hinge door. Most of them are not pocket doors.
Right.
How are you gonna fix that?
You could. So you're going to be using a LAN anyways, right?
That's the trying to
Right.
achieve.
So implement a little tool or service that will tell you when a device is not idle and it's actually in use. That way you know that, okay, well, like for example, if I'm going to be using my thermostat and I'm adjusting my temperature and I'm in the room with this adjusted temperature, I'll set a flag saying that, okay, I'm in this room. Even if I leave and there is someone there, there's still someone in the room that has the adjusted thermostat temperature. Like that's just a basic example. So you're involving also an interaction between your laser sensors, your infrared sensors, or whatever you want to call them, and the devices. So you're not just depending on one thing. Where does this come from? It actually comes from my fault tolerant class, 545. You're thinking about how to connect and link 2 devices so that if one thing fails, you have this as a backup, and back and forth.
So what do you think would be like the best sensor to set up to turn on the lights in a room? Because I don't want it, like I said, I don't want microphones, GPS, or cameras.
Motion.
And I'm trying to get away from it because I want it to be instant. Like let's say we walked out of this room right now, motion would be like, oh, it's going to shut off in 5-10 minutes.
Right.
But that's still 5-10 minutes of electricity being used.
What about sound?
Well, if you're sitting in a room reading.
Right, there's still some noise. What if you're playing music? Or like some white noise?
But what if somebody like sitting in a room quiet while they're reading?
What about thermal?
Interesting. Now that's an idea. But how would you set up a thermal recognition system?
Just like you would a motion sensor. If you detect some...
So is it like a cone array of detection?
I don't know. I haven't experienced too much about thermal sensors, but if I were to guess how they would work within your application is if you were to detect the normal body temperature, which is 97 Fahrenheit. I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit. If you were to detect that, that's a human in the room, or whatever the
Right.
pet, if you have a pet, if whatever that is, the temperature there, that's where you get it. And that's where you set it to. That's your calibration. So, I mean, that's an idea. I don't know too much about the specifics of how a thermal sensor works or how it's set up, but I mean, that's something.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look in. I like that idea. But then, like, another thing is like, so with, like I said, I want the kind of like something like this. I don't even know if the camera can see it, but it's like this little screen where it has like all this recording stuff on it. But I want it to be like UI, the screen with UI on it, so you can control. Be like, well, past 9 p.m. Like you set rules in place, like past 9 p.m. Maybe you only set the luminance of the light bulbs that turn on to like 25%. Because it's like, if you walk into the bathroom and then you just get flashbanged by your LED light when it's 2 a.m. and you just got out of a dream where you're getting chased by a zombie or something.
Right.
That's not nice.
No.
Like, I'm just trying to go to
No.
the bathroom, man. So it's like to set in rules, like let's say 10 p.m. or, maybe your phone, you can Bluetooth up to the Raspberry Pi, or I don't know, you could VPN into it or SSH or something, or just set up. I mean, you could easily do that. You could set up a SSH protocol within an app to automatically do it when you open it, and it just checks if you're on the home Wi-Fi Be like, okay, well, here we go. But there's so many things you could do. So it's like you could either do it from your phone or the tablet. So like, let's say you want to override the rules. Like, let's say you're still up late at night and you're like, well, I'm still doing stuff. I don't want to set at 25%. Be like, override lighting rules or something like that.
Right.
So it's like stuff like that, or even better, you set like like an alarm. Like you can set, oh, I only want it to be active these days of the week or something like that. So there's all these different design concepts that I'm literally just spitballing right now that
Right.
I never think about this unless I'm like talking to other people because I don't know, I'm trying to like drag people into my scheme and develop a business.
Let's
but,
go.
But it's like I don't know exactly how it's gonna work out.
Another idea, this just came to mind, and it reminded me of things I learned actually during my biomedical minor in undergrad. There's something called a piezoelectric, which is something that when applied a force or some motion, it starts to generate a specific type of energy. And I believe it is electric energy. And use that as a pressure sensor. So like if someone's walking into the room and you don't want to use infrared or laser, can have like a tile that you know 100% someone is going to walk on. Just trigger that, and then there you go.
That's smart. So another idea I wanted for smart home tech was something like an automatic garage door opener. So let's say you drive into the end of the driveway and you have that piezoelectric sensor. Is that what you said?
It's more of a material.
Material. Okay. So then that produces electric signal to go activate something that this would be like the only camera. Exterior cameras on a house, I think, are okay, like a Ring camera for security reasons. That's okay. But something is going to have to scan. Like, let's say, be like, hey, this is my license plate. Here's a picture. You send it into like an AI. Be like, hey, this is what their license plate looks like. So I'm trying to figure out, like, well, I don't want someone to just like get a picture of their license plate. So it's like, well, now you have to get a spectrometer, right? And a spectrometer depicts what an object is made of, right? So if you have this weighted pressure plate at the end of your driveway, you're like, okay, now we can activate the scanner if this thing's activated. So it's just a Boolean statement. If the weighted pressure plate is active, then scan. And then you scan the license plate. If license plate equals whatever's registered in the system, open up the garage door, then you can have another weighted pressure plate at whatever the garage leads into the house, like right in that, some people call a mudroom, or sometimes it opens up to a person's kitchen or whatever. The other side of the door from the garage, you could have, be like, okay, well, we're inside, close the garage door now. It's all automated.
There, just to build up on that, if you're thinking about privacy and just keeping integrity too, you can just even omit the whole license plate thing and just keep track of how many cars rather than not what type of car, but more dimensions of the car. That's what I'm trying to say. Using a LiDAR. So with a LiDAR, you're really just getting a 2D or 3D point representation of an object within detection range.
Is that how Face ID works?
I think Face ID uses infrared as opposed to a LiDAR.
What's the difference?
Well, infrared uses infrared waves. And LiDAR just uses regular light. Actually, no, I'm wrong. They both use the same thing. They both use the same technology. So with a LiDAR, it uses light to reflect off an object, and based on the reflectivity and intensity of the light going back to the LiDAR, it starts to understand depth and create some form of map of what it's seeing. So with respect to an object coming in, I actually did this experiment a couple of weeks ago for my research. If you set it up to look at a point of interest, it will capture movement in that point of interest, or it will capture what it thinks the environment is based on the light. And it's actually pretty cool.
That is neat. That is neat. I might have to talk to you about some LiDAR stuff.
Sure.
after the podcast.
Sure.
Do you know if we learn about that in Intro to Wireless Security?
Doubt, because it's just a type of sensor that's very new. Very new. So I doubt there's something that you're going to learn about. It might be a case study, actually, but I doubt you're going to learn about it.
The class is very interesting to me so far. Like learning about we just went over like cellular networks and how I think the coolest thing I learned was the vehicle area networks.
Right?
How they communicate with the cell towers. Be like, oh well, this car is slowing down, and so are all the other cars. Aren't all a crash must have happened, some incident may have occurred. So we're going to communicate with the cell tower and relay that to all the cars behind it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's hardcore, dude.
Yep.
But it's like people just take this stuff for granted. They don't think about
Right.
how it works, why it works. They're like, oh, cool, it's a new feature.
Right.
But it's like becoming an engineer, and this isn't trying to belittle anybody, was to to know what I know or you know, it adds like 10 times the amount of cool factor something is, because like people thought of these, then they put them into fruition. It's
Right.
blows my mind. It's like, well, fuck, what am I, a shitty engineer or something? It's like, what have I accomplished? I haven't done anything yet.
Right. If you think about it, also, like, we went from hunting using random sticks to now formulating what is the best amount of liquid to put in this cup using just letters. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is nuts. But no, this has some cool. I don't know if the camera can like see this, but it has like a cool little. What is that called?
So this little pot thing right here, in Arabic, this is called a della, which means coffee pot. And then really this is just beans, and you're just pouring the coffee into a little container.
That's neat. So did you get these specifically just for your coffee business?
No, so these are actually just, we serve sometimes for guests. If we don't have enough cups sometimes for the amount of guests that we have, so we just use paper cups. And they're recyclable, so that's nice too.
Nice and green.
Yep, and it just has that nice design on it too.
Yeah, no, it is. I saw them like, man, he's really going all out with these. Like, this is a very fancy Dixie cup.
What's interesting is I actually got these from home, like from Kuwait.
Really?
Yeah, they're not even from here.
What's this QR code lead you to?
I have no idea.
Is that a virus?
Yes.
That is most definitely. I'm almost curious. I'll have to do it after the podcast.
Sure.
But what would you say with your coffee business has been the biggest struggle for you?
Finding people to buy it, which goes with any business. Customer
Yes.
discovery is difficult. And with the tools that we have, it's amazing that you can push a product to as many people as possible just with a press of a button. And that's crazy to me. The struggle is really just the budget of doing that. Things are very expensive in terms of advertising, especially if you really want to go upscale. And then considering the trade-offs between how much do I want to pay for advertising with respect to my product and for how long do I want to do it, it really just makes it tough to keep it going. But at the same time, it's worth it.
I have somebody I know who works in advertising. If you'd like me to reach out to them for you.
That'd be great.
To ask for advice because I asked them for advice for my podcast, and thankfully she gave me a couple pointers here and there. And I like asking people about things. It doesn't mean I'm always going to take their advice. Because, like, right now I have a person who is like, well, you should do, like, an intro or talk to brief over the things you talked about that not everyone, like a band. I'm like, to me, if the person's interested, they'll just look up what the band is. Like, I feel like I don't need to cover every single Google search that could emit from a podcast. Like,
Right.
That's part of... At least what I like about Joe Rogan and stuff, like, if something I'm like, well, what's this about? Then I'll go Google it or whatever. I feel like self-independent study is very important, even at any stage of life, to not be spoon-fed knowledge, because I feel like you retain knowledge way more when it's self-discovered.
Right.
And that's kind of the pain with some classes. Like sometimes I'll just like be drift. So I feel like you were probably the person to ask this. How do you like not just like die in your classes? Like for me, like I'll think about one thing and then next thing you know, I'm on a 30-second like in not in class. I'm not in like I'm just zoned out for 30 seconds. I'm like, I need to stop.
So this is going to happen to everyone, regardless of whoever you think you are, regardless if you're the smartest person on the planet or the dumbest person on the planet. It just happens. We're humans. We have an attention span. It's just natural, right? But what we can't control is how much of that attention span goes away or comes back, and then how to retain whatever happened in that period of just losing space. So what I like to do, if that starts happening, is I try to start doodling, which sounds pretty silly, but as soon as I start doodling, well, I'm in class and I'm already spaced out, right? Subconsciously, I'm going to try to doodle whatever I just heard, if I'm just trying to do something without thought. And it actually helps me refocus and be like, oh, we just talked about this. I should actually retain this. And it just brings me back into the concentration focus, which is why I like to draw a lot in my study notes. So if you see my study notes, they're actually really crazy. And it's just filled with random drawings and it's just filled with random words too that have no meaning to anyone but me, but it makes sense to me because once I get onto that, oh, I'm spacing out, I should come back in, it helps me get back onto focus.
Yeah, I feel like I started off really strong this semester. I'm like, all right, we're cooking, but then I'm like, podcast, post grad job, all this stuff,
right?
And I don't know. I'm probably gonna cut this little section on the podcast, but I don't know if I told you, but I have a NSA internship interview Thursday.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty fucking stoked about that, dude. I'm like, I just shot my shot, and they're like, yeah. So what time are you free for an interview? I'm like,
there you go. That's awesome.
Yeah, but yeah. So I heard if you get an internship, and so one of my online gaming buddies, one of his family members worked at the NSA for a very long time. And so he called him up and was like, hey, do you have any advice for him, whatever, or any just facts you want to give him about it? And so you don't need, what I heard, you don't need clearance for a remote internship position because you're not going to be given any classified data when you're remote because that's all going to stay, on site. But getting an internship makes getting a job with the NSA 50 times easier.
Right.
And I'm like, well, that's sick. Because working for the NSA is like probably almost my dream gig.
Yeah.
Just because government benefits are astronomically greater than working, even private sector. I mean, private sector pays way more for cybersecurity. However, benefits, you cannot go wrong with benefits.
Yeah.
Because like, let's say, I don't know. I have no idea. Like, let's say cancer hits me. It's like, well, if you don't have good health insurance, good luck.
Right.
So it's like there's so many if this, then what, or what about this or that. There's so many curveballs life can throw. It's like COVID's still making its rounds out there. I mean, it's not as crazy as it was, but it's still a thing. And I don't know, I only got the first 2 shots or whatever. But I'm like, okay, at least my body knows what it is.
Right.
So it's like hopefully if I get affected by it, then it's like, whatever, it's cold. But I have no idea, man. It's like, I'm not a medical student. I don't know how bacteria or viruses evolve. I know the flu is different every year. They're like, oh, that's how you get your new flu shot, whatever.
Right.
So it's going to be probably the same thing with COVID. You got to get your yearly COVID shot. But I'm like, if I get it, I get it. I'm not terribly worried about it, but I don't even know what got me on that little side rant there. It's just like when I start podcasting, we get past the hour mark, it's just like a free for all mentally. But no, I don't know. What were we talking about?
We're talking about the internship. Just how do you not get sidetracked?
I actually just got sidetracked.
It's ironic. It's very ironic.
Very ironic.
how do you not get sidetracked with a how do you not get sidetracked from the main goal even though you're in the main steps? Basically, that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So here's a good analogy that I've recently been adopting into my thinking. So relating back to what you noticed about my bio, which is the dreamer surrealism. In order for me to get my surreal or dreamlike goal, I can't just jump to it. Like that's if it were that easy, I would have already had it. But it's not, right? So to actually get there, we need to take the appropriate amount of steps and slowly but surely achieve what we want. So for example, a good example is drawing. This is something that I relate to. I do this almost every day. In order for you to create a 30-hour masterpiece from your own opinion, you still need to make one stroke that starts it all. And that one stroke takes, I don't know, half a second. And you start by outlining what your idea is. You got a general outline. That might change. You might change as you're going through it. You might not like how this specific thing looks. You might change it. It might not look like your final goal. The idea is you're recognizing it. And you see that, oh, I made this outline. I spent some time on it. I'm examining what's going on. I might change it to align more with the experience that I gained making that outline. And then slowly fill it in. And you'll take that same approach of outlining to your first draft, second draft, final, and so on and so on and so on. So really what I'm trying to say is if you're trying to go up the stairs, you're not just going to jump up to the top stair. You're going to take the first step, second step, and slowly go there. You're just subconsciously going to recognize that, oh, I just made it past the first step. Now I should go to the second step. You're recognizing it. You're saying, oh, I'm doing this. So to translate that into motivational speech, as soon as you start making a step towards what you think is your goal, recognize that you made that step and be proud of that step because that's still something. It's something to you. It got you somewhere that you weren't. And from there, that's how you see yourself and improve your own motivation towards not getting sidetracked because you're still you're not losing sight of the main goal, which might change, might not change. Who knows? That's something that you're supposed to find out. But you're still taking a step on some path out of multiple to get there.
Yeah. I feel for motivation and like you said, like every masterpiece requires you have to take the first stroke and it might not even be the right one. But so I like this. I like this analogy you just made. So my biggest thing with like modern day society is people want to do so many things, but the thing like my biggest pet peeve of all time is people saying, "Oh, I don't have time." That's all you have.
Right.
All you have is time. That's the only thing you are in control of. It's what you do with that time. Do you want to go to work today? Do you want to make money? Do you want to learn? What do you want to do? Ultimately, I mean, sure, there can be social consequences for what you do, but ultimately, you are the depictor of what you do with your time. Like, you can just be like, oh, I'm just not going to go to work today, but you won't have a job.
Right.
Right? But I just wish people realized more, be like, you do have the control over your life. It's like, you know, one of my good friends say, oh, wait till you have a wife and kids or whatever. You won't have that much time. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to make that choice to sacrifice my time while there's still stuff I want to do.
Right.
When I am done with what I want to do, that's when I'll focus on my life of building the next generation.
Right.
And I don't know when that will be. I have no idea. But I feel like people just get comfortable and it breaks my heart because it's like there's so many people with good ideas that just say, oh, I don't have time to put into a reality.
Right.
And like one of my friends, he wants to make a suppressor company, like manufacturing and CNCing suppressors and just like, you know, rifle slings and stuff like that. I'm like, well, do it, dude. Like, but like like you said, he's like, I just don't have the time. I'm like, I get it. You know, it's like you can either be a good dad or a bad dad, right? And I feel just, I don't know, this isn't a knock at anybody who doesn't have a dad, but I feel having both parents active in somebody's life makes a very big difference in terms of charisma, characteristics, personality, all that stuff in a person. Just because, to me, it's a fact that you're better off if you have two parents growing up who are stable, stay active with you, and it just helps with your character development. That's what at least I've seen. Like
Right.
it's like it bumps you a couple steps ahead in life. And it, you know, it's sad for the people that don't get that, but it's like at the end of the day, you can only do what you're given, right?
Right.
But what you can do is just because you're only given lemons doesn't mean you can't go to a store and get limes, right?
Right.
So I feel what I'm trying to say here is like there's so many people with so many good ideas. You just got to have the fucking balls to do it, right?
Right.
That's what it boils down. Like you with your coffee business, you're like, I don't care. I'm just going to do it.
Right.
With this podcast, I'm just going to do it. I've dumped, I don't know. Well, this whole setup is free to use, but so that guy we were talking to before he came in here, he's like, when are you graduating? I'm like, in May. And he's like, well, if you want to, you can come in and I can show you like some setups I've made, just like digital ones, like, you know, PC part picker, but for like podcast studio setups. And we can like try and figure out like something that might be viable for you. Cause that mixer in there, that's like $5,000.
Right. Yeah.
But he was telling me, he's like, well, Rode, I don't know if you know Rode audio equipment.
Yeah.
They just made like a $600 mixer thing for like personal podcasting stuff. And I'm like, well, you know, $6,000 is quite a bit cheaper than, or 600 is quite a bit cheaper than $5,000.
Right.
And that's without sale. But come Black Friday,
There you go.
you never know. So I'm hoping I get a post-grad opportunity here with coming career fair. But what's sad, so here's the crazy thing. How many cyber jobs do you think would be coming to career fair?
I would say there has to be at least 20, 30, 40.
Like positions I could apply for?
Yeah.
2.
Really? That's surprising.
Yeah. One of them is RSM, which I already interviewed with in the fall, and I wasn't experienced enough for them, which I'm like, understandable, because they're like, well, how do you go about testing a web application? And I'm like, well, first off, I try and trace route their server and stuff, see if there's anything vulnerable along that. Then that's not the right answer at all. That's just, you know, a basic DNS query, which, you know, is an aspect of it, but it's like they're looking for cookie request source or forging and all that stuff. So it's like you can act as another user on the website to see if you can get admin privileges or different privileges or go see data you're not supposed to see, or, you know, your SQL injections to try and get into, you know, databases that you're not supposed to see, dump passwords, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a cool thing out there called Port Swigger, made by Burp Suite, and that is all free web-based application testing you can go learn about. And it's totally free. You just got to sign up for it, make your account, and you have like 60, 70 labs available to you.
Cool.
So yeah, I don't know if that's your cup of tea, if you have a little bad blood in you to go be an ethical hacker.
I'm definitely interested in that stuff. I like learning about anything. So if there's
Yeah.
any opportunity that I could learn, I'll just go for it. Why not?
Yeah, it opens up your library of skills, and that's like my biggest fear. It's like I don't want to become a jack of all trades. I want to be like really freaking great at like 5 things. That's my problem. But it's like I get so interested over like, oh, like the Arabic coffee thing. I'm like, well, what's this all about? You know, it's like seeing, like, genuinely, I think it'd be really neat. Like, I actually went to the website, and I would say to boost your business, maybe I was reading the instructions, and I'm like, well, I have no idea what sieving is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I have no idea. So it's like, rather than having to go find a YouTube video to figure out how to make Arabic coffee, maybe I could help you with this. Just make like a little how-to, you know, prepare and serve. I think that'd be cool.
Interesting. I did not think about that at all. So first of all, thank you for taking the time to go through that and just looking at it. And also thank you for giving me your perspective on it. That actually helps. This is part of the customer discovery. Like,
Yeah.
what is your problem with what you're already seeing, and then how do I fix that?
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. We'll definitely take you up on that advice.
Yeah, like I said, I can help you. I have the editing software for it. We could whip something up.
Sure.
I think, yeah, it'd be neat. Like you're giving me ideas for this podcast. I'm giving you ideas for the coffee business. I think your best bet's go to scooters though, and that would open up a lot.
That's
Even if
so
it's just
true.
the local Ames one,
Right.
and even if you got into Clyde's, just be like, I don't know how it would work. I feel if you being a student in Iowa State, you'd have higher chances as someone who would not be. But I don't know. You have to be like, hey, who's your manager? Is the manager in today? I'd like to talk to them about a new product or something. But I don't know the limitations and rules of Starbucks chains, if they even can do, because most times franchises are very limited as to what they can do independently,
Right.
which is kind of the crappy thing. But I don't know, maybe, didn't you say there was an Iowa State-based coffee hub thing? Or what's that one in the hub by Parks?
The hub.
Yeah.
So, with the Iowa State-based just coffee places, the cafes and the restaurants, they've already partnered up with the Roastery, which is an alumni company. So someone who was an Iowa State alumni, they started this coffee company. So they already got a contract with them. So the issue that I faced with trying to partner up with already existing local cafes is that it's either they misunderstand that they think I'm trying to replace the already existing coffee, or there's just not enough of an opportunity to expand this within their customer base. So, like, for example, I've experienced this with one cafe names, and they thought that I was trying to replace the coffee, which is not right. So basically, how it was a very quick interaction, so I couldn't get the chance to explain more. But at the same time, given her perspective, I understood and where she was coming from. So it's hard to explain it in a way. Like, it's basically kind of like an elevator pitch. It's really hard to explain it in a way without trying to say, like, oh, we're going to replace this. When really you're not trying to do that. You're just trying to add, but it's difficult.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think, how would the profit margins work?
In terms of what?
Like, let's say you're supplying Clyde's with coffee beans. Like, hey, here's how you guys make it. I will supply X amount per month. We'll see how this goes. What percent of profit would you be looking for?
So really, for now, I want to at least make, so per bag, it costs about, I want to say, so per like half pound bag, it costs about $18 to make. Sorry, it costs about $10, $12 to make. And I sell a half pound bag for, I think it's $15 that I have it on, or $20. I can't remember. It's one of them.
So you pay 12 and you sell it for 15.
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason why that is because the availability of this product is still small. And obviously, I can go for the monopoly route, but at the same time, I have to think about people who are trying to buy this or who have never even experienced Arabic coffee before. What are they thinking when they're looking at this and they're like, oh, why is this $30 or $40? Like, what makes it so special? Even though it really is a different type of coffee, but compared to their own experience of coffee, they're going to be looking at, for example, just a half pound bag from Starbucks, which is $10, and compared to this, which is at the time 30, 40, you'd be like, why would I choose this?
Yeah. That's the thing. It's like once you're going neck and neck against a corporation or franchise, they are more than likely getting bulk discounts from their suppliers. They have contracts that also help them get cheaper routes of supplies and shipping. So that's kind of the thing. So it's like at first I'm like, well, your profit margin seems really small,
Right.
but at the same time, you almost have to even get your foot in the door.
Exactly.
Which sucks. But I feel the way you could present this to, let's say, Clyde's or, I don't know, scooters, usually like, if you understood how many, people from the Middle East or around that area came to Iowa State and seek of a bit higher education, there's a market for it.
Right.
If you actually got the statistics and if you showed another company in America that, was successful with bringing in, Arabic coffee grounds or whatever, if you prove that your product can be successful to them because if you show them the market's there, if you show them that it's been done before, I feel that's your catch-22. That's your elevator pitch.
Okay. I'll take that in consideration. Thank you for that advice. There is, so interestingly enough, after you said that, I remembered this book that I read over winter break. So it was actually written by Dale Carnegie. I don't know if it's related in any way to the college or not, or university, sorry. So it's basically called How to Influence People and Win Friends. So really sad name, but that book was awesome. And it basically goes on to explain to you how to interact with people and how to be seen as a empathetic leader, how to understand and improve just interpersonal relationships between friends, family, or just strangers even. And based on what you just said, it reminded me of things in the book of like, how do I make them want my pitch? Because really that's what it boils down to. How do I present it in a way that they want it as opposed to me wanting them? Which is a different perspective if you think about it.
Yeah. I would say another thing to keep in mind too is, well, this is a nice quote I heard recently, and the younger generation, aka us that are, going to be going into the workforce, is that it's like, people say dress for the job, don't overdress, but don't underdress. This older guy who's a successful entrepreneur, I don't remember who it was from, but my mom told me this. Now she was reading like an Apple News article or something, that there's no such thing as overdressing. If you're about it, be about it.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, I'm not gonna go to Hy-Vee in search of a job, showing up in like a suit, because it's like my Hy-Vee days are over, unless I'm applying for like corporate level. But it's like, even if you're going into, let's go say, cyber engineer or computer engineer, show up in that suit. It's like if you're to the nines, they're gonna be like, this dude's about it. Like he is putting on his A game. And I don't know, people are like I used to be like it too. It's like, if you overdress, it's like you don't look like you know what you're doing. But it's like you either know what you're doing or you don't.
Right.
It's not about how you look. It's about, like, that's the thing. Like, I am actually very against dressing up just to look like I'm a smart person or whatever. But it's like for that first impression, it's like to get your foot in a company, be as best as you can.
Right.
Or as dressing up to the nines, whatever. But it's like, if after let's say I do make my business, then, I'd expect them, it's like, if you're trying to get an interview with me, come in with your suit on, whatever, and we'll talk like gentlemen, or, just very civilized people. If I said gentlemen, I'm like, well, a girl can also apply too, right? It's like, yeah. But I feel after the initiation is done, it's like, if someone showed up to work like with what I'm wearing or what you're wearing, I'd be like, I wouldn't care.
Right.
If you're working good, doesn't bother me.
Right.
As long as your clothing isn't distracted for other people or yourself in the workplace, it's like, I see no problem with it. Mm-hmm. Like, if you come in with a white T-shirt and basketball shorts, but you crank out 100 lines of the most efficient code anybody's seen in the office in the last 5 years, I'm not gonna say anything about your outfit. I'm like, I think you look rather nice today. You know what I mean? But it's like, being comfortable is also another important aspect in terms of productivity. It's like some people, like I remember back in high school, people were like just coming with like sweatpants and a hoodie, and they'd come with like slippers during a test day, but they'd crank out that test in 20 minutes and get like a 95%.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a double-edged sword. It's like to put on a good impression, to meet somebody, and out of business respect, I feel that suit's necessary. So I don't know, maybe when you're pitching to a coffee place or a place that serves coffee, come in with a suit and show them you're about it.
Sure. No, that's a good point. I like that story. Thank you. And going off of that, just dressing up in general, the rule of thumb that I have is if you feel uncomfortable taking out the formal side of it out, because just wearing a suit or a dress is uncomfortable. You can't.
Yeah, that's just a fact.
Yeah, it just goes with it. Like taking out that aspect of just situations for a short time. If you're uncomfortable in what you're wearing the wrong thing. And I'm not just saying go out shirtless. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is like if you're not comfortable within something that you are wearing, then it'll show. Like you'll just be uneasy, and it's all a mental game, really. But just showing up in a way that you are comfortable and you are happy is a step towards bringing your A game. Like you brought in the example of a white T-shirt and basketball shorts. If someone's comfortable wearing that, and that's the person that allows, or I guess that's the persona that allows themselves to go to a higher potential, sure, they're comfortable, right? But whereas if they're doing that in a suit and it's limiting what they're doing, that's a different story. So I think just being comfortable in what you present yourself as, and that just goes for anything too. Like not just clothes, like how you speak too. Like if you're not comfortable or you're forcing yourself to do something, you're not doing it right. You're just or you're not being yourself.
Yeah, I feel authenticity in this day and age is very lacking with social media.
Yep.
Because all people do, they're like, oh, I had this stroke of good luck or whatever. I'm going to post about it, and my dopamine charts are going to go insane. But no one ever posts about the bad times, and maybe that's for the better. I don't know. I mean, social media would be really depressing if it was just bad stuff all the time. But the problem is this is actually a really cool discussion I like to have with people. This is my case study that I'm going to make my hypothesis on.
Sure.
Social media is the reason for 70 to 80% of depression. I'm going to die on that hill.
Sure.
And the reason why I say that is because, and it's not because of the fact that people were scared of coming out about having depression or whatever back in the days, but you see these influencers posting about, like, oh, I just gave away $10,000. Look at Jimmy. He just got a new Honda Fit, whatever. And stuff like that. It's like, people like Mr. Beast are really cool. They do a bunch of like community-based projects and stuff. But they're just highlighting all the good stuff in their life. And if someone's always, just having just a terrible fucking month, or it's like, like let's say their mom died, their cat died, whatever, and just whatever unfortunate event happens, it's like, well, why can't my life be like that? Da, 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 da. It's like, well, you're only looking at other people's good things. It's like, and what if they lost both their parents or whatever? It's like, it's too much of a focus on the good stuff, and that's what gets caught in the algorithm that pushes out. It sucks because it's like, I'll say I was I'm not gonna victimize myself about it, but it's like I fell into a trap too, right? It's like, you see all these people going to concerts and stuff. It's like I was just going to school or whatever. It's like, well, then go to a concert. If it bothers you so much, go do something about it.
Right.
Don't just sit back and be like, oh, poor me. I don't have a good life. It's like, well, save your money and do what you want. And post it. If you want to fit in, then post about it or don't post about it. Right. Just go live whatever you need to do to live your life. Do it.
Right.
I feel like people are too focused on other people. So that's the thing. So another thing I heard Normal people talk about other people. Great people talk about ideas, but the best people put their ideas in motion.
I like that quote. That's true. I definitely agree with that. On terms of the social media, I'm actually taking a class right now. It's called HCI 530X. It's an experimental class. HCI stands for Human Computer Interaction. And the class is on perspectives in human computer interaction. And actually, last week, we were learning about the ideas of cognitive and subconscious and unconscious bias, and also the idea of persona versus identity, which, if you think about it, it's a huge distinction between what these two really are. And then also, I'll go back to that in a little bit, also the front stage versus backstage effect. So, for example, if you think of a play, there's a lot of performers, there's a lot of orchestra, there are a lot of people in an orchestra running the soundtrack. There's a lot of talented actors who are playing out what you're looking at. And also, in the backstage, you've got all of these production engineers, you've got all of these sound engineers, you've got all of these people helping just to show the perfection that's going on in the front stage. You don't really see what's going on in the backstage, all the work that's being put in to maintain this idea of perfection on the play. And at the same time, the best show is in the front stage. You're not interested in what's going on in the backstage. That doesn't mean what's happening in the backstage is invalidated. It's there. It just goes into showing off what's in the front stage. So pushing that back to social media, people like to show a positive or what they want to be persona. It's not ideally what their identity is. Identity is what you are as a person, whereas persona is what you show. So it just goes on to show a lot of what happens in the front stage. And where people fall, or where, to go on your quote, normal people always fall into is, why am I not doing this, but they are, which is falling into the trap of comparing yourself to others. Really, this is where the idea of control and self-validation comes in. If I know that if I have that time, that financial power, or that opportunity, and I was in that other person's shoes, I would do exactly the same thing. And it's just also an empathy aspect. It's just understanding what they're doing. But at the same time, if we're looking at where I am compared to seeing what this person is doing, I would still do the same thing that I'm doing right now based on my own circumstances. That doesn't mean that you should settle. It just means that, oh, I'm aware of what's happening. Instead of sulking and comparing myself to them, I should probably just focus on myself and push myself in order to get to somewhere I want to be. And hopefully show off something like that. Even if you're looking for some validation like that, just show off something like that appeals to you. So that was a really long tangent.
No, it all made sense. I feel like you hit a lot of good key points. Or like, I feel comparing to another human being should only be for motivation and not for self-pity. Because I feel the problem is with modern people is, you know, a lot of my friends from my old job, and if they hear this, don't take this in a negative way, but I feel they're just like, oh, well, my friends make $80K a year and I only make $50K a year. You know, a big difference. It's like, well, if you're happy with what you do, who cares? You know, it's like, make do with what you have in life. Oh, and thank you, by the way. It's good. It's good, dude. It's good. No. I guess this can be the first unofficial official sponsorship by Gora beans.
Close. So the name of the company is Gahwa Beans.
Gahwa.
Yeah, GAHWA. So Gahwa.
Gahwa.
Yeah, there you go.
Gahwa
beans.
So
what's interesting about that is it's literally the word for coffee in Arabic.
Really?
So it's coffee beans. That's what it means.
I like how simple the name is, really. Because it's like, yeah, dude, that'd be... Yeah, I really think you should take this to, like, Clydes or scooters. And it's like I said, it's always no until you ask.
Right.
Like, and even when you say or hear no, just take it as a learning curve. And I feel what a lot of people, I'm gonna take a sip real quick. A lot of people are scared of hearing no, not just the dating realm either. Like even with the date, I feel like that's what applies most to when it's always a no until you ask, right? But you can always pitch business ideas. You can always pitch ideas for something to be more efficient or better something. But I feel coming up with a business idea and executing it. Dan Pena, one of my favorite motivators of all time, he's like, I've failed so many times before, like over 50 to 100 times in my life, but all those were literally just learning curves for what I'm really trying to accomplish in my life. And that's all it is. It's not, I failed, this is terrible. It's, I failed, what can I do to not fail next time?
Right.
Because, and this kind of coincides with, you can only do with what you have, but you are your own maker. That's a quote I just put up on the spot. But, it's like, if you want the money, then go talk to a venture capitalist. Go on Shark Tank or go to someone similar. So there's people with money in the world. It's whether or not you can bring out a good, fair opportunity for them to get involved, whether it be financially or directly. I mean, there's so many ways you can go about presenting an idea. And what's crazy, so with that smart home business, I actually presented this idea to both Dr. I'm going to redact these names, post-edit note, Dr. Phil Jones and Dr. Henry Dewey. Phil Jones was very supportive of the idea, and Dewey was like, it's not going to work. Because the fact, if society is so latched onto the idea of easy access for Google Home, your Amazon Alexa, all this stuff, why would they care about the privacy? And well, my thought is like, it's not that and one of my online friends said recently, if you don't have anything to hide, then why do you care? If you're not doing anything bad, why do you want to hide everything? It's like, well, why don't you just get rid of all the curtains in your house? Why don't you get rid of all the shades?
Right.
Why not just get tinted windows or something that you can still see in at night?
Right.
And it's scary how easy information is. I mean, you just buy data packets. That's all it is. It's just folders. Like with all the, here's what's crazy. So when the last election came, I was back at community college. So I was still going there, and they'd be like, "Hey Ryan, this is whatever from the Democratic or Republican Party, whatever." They're just promoting whoever campaign they're working for, and I'm like, "How did you get my number?" Like what? But how I worded was, "What data packet did you get my number from?" Because I'm like, I want to know who's selling my data, right? And they're like, "Oh, from Scott Community College." I'm like,
"Oh,
really?" Like my college is making money on my data, really? And metadata is just the most profitable thing out there. So, and here is another fun fact that I know. So, back when AI was the voice AI was starting to become a thing, like your Bixby, your Alexa, your Siri, all this stuff. Siri is obviously the least developed AI out there. But like your Google stuff, your Bixby, you ask a question, it will read a news article or something out to you if you choose it to. But Siri won't really read, the quick Google answer out to you. It'll be like, here's what we found on the internet.
Right.
Which I think is very interesting. Because it's like, well, that's kind of a pain in the ass. And it's like, I can't look at my phone right now. It's like if I'm, like for instance, like back in like 2020 and 2021, I was playing Minecraft. I'm like, hey, how do you make blank or whatever? And my, Samsung Note 10 would be like, oh, it's this, this, and this. And I'm like, cool, perfect. But, with my iPhone, you have to look at it. But the reason for this is because Microsoft and Samsung would listen in on the calls. They wouldn't do anything other than pick up the dictation of your voice, and they'd listen for keywords. They wouldn't even if you said something incriminating, they wouldn't be like, hey, because, that goes against, you have to have a warrant to find something incriminating, right? So that was so kind of iffy to me because like you're still listening in on phone calls and stuff because like where does this fall in line with FERPA, HIPAA, all this stuff, right? Like let's say I'm talking to my mom on the phone about financial aid information. Well, one that goes against the like leaking information about that, the Privacy Act in 1974. That was all personally identifiable information, which to me ranges from everything. You know, you have your health insurance information, you have your student loan information, all this stuff. You have housing loans, car payments, all this stuff. All this can be tracked back to you. But then they also added, I think in the 80s and 90s, FERPA and HIPAA. So your FERPA is your federal education, whatever. Federal Education Rights Privacy Act, I don't know, something. But all it does, that protects your student information, your grades, your assignments, your transcript, all this stuff. And then HIPAA protects your medical information. And what's crazy is the reason why hospitals, in my opinion, need cybersecurity the most is because HIPAA information is, one, the most punishing of, if data gets leaked, that's the most punishing by jail time and just regulations. And it's also the most valuable. So if you think about it, so here is something I learned that, you know, your Amazon Alexa is always listening, but so is your phone. Like if I say, hey Siri, which I probably just activated in my pocket, it's always listening for hey Siri. But if I'm a doctor talking about a patient's data in the nurse's space in the office, isn't the phone picking that up too?
Right.
Is that against HIPAA?
I would say it's an interesting debate. It just also depends on, it goes into the details of what actually is being picked up or not. Because, like, it could be just, so when you're setting up voice assistants, they're looking for frequencies of voice. So, my opinion, it's a really hard debate. Interesting. So, if you're making me go back and forth, it depends. I guess what I'm trying to say, it depends on what really is being picked up by the device. So if you're calibrating it to match your voice, that's telling me that it's trying to pick up a certain frequency of the word Siri or Alexa or whoever. So by that notion, it won't start analyzing what's being said until you say that specific frequency, which goes to say, like, well, what if you get a similar frequency? Well, at that point, that just falls into the calibration methods of whoever is setting up the AI device. Under that assumption that it only tracks as soon as you say those specific keywords, I'd say it doesn't affect or violate HIPAA. If the way that it works is not like that, I'd say, yeah, it definitely violates HIPAA because it's constantly listening and recording stuff. So where is that actually being sent? Who's listening to that? And when is it being listened to?
You know, it'd be a cool project.
What?
To see if you could hack like an Alexa. Like imagine they have like an Alexa or Google Home or Apple Home in a doctor's office space. You're like, okay, as someone in the local area network of this thing or wide area network, can I remote access into it, change some of the code to not wait for this frequency, but to just analyze everything and send it to a server. So now I'm getting MP3 or WAV files of everything that's being said, or it's just being live streamed and recorded on there. There's so many what ifs because, like, I think it'd be really neat to see if you could hack the code to analyze everything rather than just wait for, like, just rather than a wait statement to wait for the specific event to occur and then process. I wonder if you could do that. But the only way to cancel that out, and I don't know if these, because I don't use them, just because I'm like, it just feels like Big Brother's always there. And I wonder if you could make it so it has to have an internet connection to work.
I think that's how it works. You have to have an internet connection. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to understand, or if you're asking it to look up something and there's no internet, it's not going to do anything with it, right? So it's just going to say, I'm not connected to the internet.
Right.
So I guess going back to that project, that would be an interesting pitch or a selling point that can start off your business.
Yeah. So what I was thinking about was like, so if it's connected to if it has to be connected to the internet, couldn't you grab, like let's say Amazon Alexa was like, hey, here is the code's hash, which is like an MD5 hash. It's a simple hash, but just MD5. Here is the known hash for the code. And if anything, like let's say we manipulate the code of Alexa, it can't work if the code's manipulated because it does an MD5 checksum. And it's like, hey, the code got manipulated. It doesn't match the hash of the original code that was implemented in the device, so it can't perform anymore. That'd be interesting.
That'd be a definitely interesting idea. One of my friends actually worked on something really similar for a PlayStation memory card. They were trying to extract data from a memory card and just simulate it on a different emulator. So taking the memory card, the physical memory card, trying to simulate it on an emulator, and then as soon as he started modifying it, it just bricked the data because it started being corrupted.
Really?
Yes. So he was just looking into how to fix that because he just wanted to play his game. So he didn't really pursue it that much, but it just reminded me of that. So the project would definitely be interesting, like because you're really exploring how this works and whether these big name companies are actually following through with what they're doing with their data and when they're actually using their data. Are they actually looking after that prompt or are they actually listening before? And from that before, what's actually being recorded or not and what's being used in their data and how are they using that data? It just goes on and on and on, and it makes it really interesting. And at the same time, that project will make it really difficult because we'll have to think about who we're dealing with. We're dealing with big name companies. So obviously they didn't just write it in like a 185 lab and call it good. Like it took a lot of years to come up with this one device. So just going from there.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest thing would be, well, let's say this is our case study. And I mean, I feel like I have pretty big imposter syndrome with like what I know. Like, I feel like I'm a nobody in the engineer realm. At least not yet, but it's like I really want to be like a pretty big name. Something like I think it'd be sick. Like I said, to have the smart home technology and do like all these different case studies. It's like I don't know if I want a PhD, but it's like I just like stuff that interests me, right? So it's like to do the case study of the Amazon Alexa or whatever, to see if I can manipulate the code. Because if I can manipulate the code, in theory, I could write a script. That script kiddies could load up to like a flipper zero or whatever. That could be like, hey, connect to whatever Amazon Alexa is within range. Just do a broadcast packet. Figure out what's on the network, and be like, oh, hey, well, here's the MAC address of what this Amazon Alexa is, because the first 3 octets of your MAC address is the manufacturer. Right? So you can tell, it'll be like, oh, well, this is made by Amazon, or this is made by Cisco, or Netgear, whatever, Microsoft, Apple, all this stuff. That's kind of the cool thing with the MAC address. You can figure out what kind of devices are on your network by just looking at a MAC address, then taking those into Google, be like, oh, well, this is primarily a company that uses Mac or Windows or Linux. So that's kind of a whole thing. And so it's just like, oh, well, this is a product made by Amazon. Well, how many IoT devices are made by Amazon? I genuinely don't know. The only one I know is the Alexa. But if you write a script, be like, okay, look for MAC address blank, and then we are going to manipulate this piece of code. This should just all be one script, and you could run it through. Be like, just get a list of all the MAC addresses through, you just say, hey, who's there, right? You send out your broadcast packet, and then you're like, oh, hey, we found all these different Amazon-based IoT devices. We're going to go through a for loop, and we are going to manipulate the code to have them always just analyze everything being said and send it back to the server.
Right.
And that server could be whatever the only thing the people would have to do is just put in the server IP of whatever and just set up the SSH connection or whatever. I don't know. I just feel like that could be a very insecure way of eavesdropping. Don't you think?
Right. So it's, from the way that you're wording it, it sounds doable. And at the same time, you'd have to think about as soon as you're eavesdrop, so it really just sounds like discovery to me. Which I mean, if they're connected to some sort of network, or if they themselves create their own like little Wi-Fi network, it would be discoverable anyways. But the way you're looking at it is you're saying like, okay, I found this stuff. What are they doing, right? And that's definitely an interesting perspective, an interesting spark for debate of what are these devices actually really doing? Like, I know they're meant to play music or like soothe my pet or like tell me what the recipe is for a specific type of pecan pie or something like that. And then what behind the scenes really, if I were to eavesdrop on them and discover them and just find that one tiny little bit, because one tiny little bit changes everything, that shows that, okay, this is what's really happening. This is really what's happening under the scenes. What can I do with that? And how can I push that even further to understand really what I'm dealing with and who I'm dealing with, which is really interesting because you're just jumping into many different rabbit holes and it just goes on and on.
So that's the thing with like penetration testing on systems and stuff for networks. Like right now I'm a TA for ethical hacking and stuff. And like one of the first labs we did, what was that, 2 weeks ago? Now it was not this last week, but the week before, like week 2 of the semester. And what we had them do is like, hey, look up a company on the internet, do your whois search for your DNS, and then you got to figure out, well, who's hosting that? Where are they located? So you do your IP to geolocator stuff. You're like, well, this is being located or, hosted in the state of, let's say, Des Moines or, Denver, Colorado, whatever, mostly big name cities. But you can still find out so much information about just stuff. And it's not even, this is all passive, right? They don't know what you're doing. They don't get, I mean, they could have flags set up, be like, hey, but that's also, I don't know. I don't know. But you could trace route something. You know what trace route is?
Yes.
Does that send an ICMP packet?
Trace route.
Or what packet does that
I
send?
think it does ICMP.
Okay.
It's similar to ping.
Yeah. That's what I figured.
So ICMP.
Yeah. So ICMP is, for the listeners, just a packet that's just like a packet that just kind of says, hey, are you alive? And if it resolves, yes, it is alive. If it does not resolve, it's turned off or doesn't exist. So, yeah, dude, the internet's freaking insane. And, like, going into my junior year, I still really had no idea how really the internet worked. But after taking the intro to cyber, and that taught me the OSI, TCP, IP model,
Right.
I'm like, this is sick.
Yeah.
Like, and then CPRE 430, have you taken that class?
Yes.
That was a hardcore class.
Yep.
Like, I'm just so I don't have to edit the name out. That professor, I need to send an email to them and be like, I would love to have you on the podcast. That would be a big one.
That'd be great. That'd be great. He's an amazing talker. Not gonna lie.
He's a great professor. He's probably one of my favorites, just because he's a very, very funny individual.
Exactly. I was just about to say he's really funny.
Yeah, like, do you know the movie The Interview that was made for the Sony hack?
I heard about it, but I haven't seen it.
Anyways, he's like, this is a terrible fucking movie. But the only way you can really enjoy this movie is if you're on the influence. Yeah, I'm like, okay.
All right.
I'm like, I don't know what your choice words is for the substitution, that blank there, but each their own, man. I'm not gonna say anything, but no, he's an awesome professor. I still have to watch Thursday's lecture. I'm in information warfare right now. Have you taken that class?
Not yet.
Is that on your plan?
Not necessarily on the plan, but I plan on auditing it, which means I take the course material, but I'm not graded on it. So I basically
you can do that?
Yeah, you can.
How?
So you'd have to talk to the professor. Some professors allow it, some don't, but it really is just taking and being in the Canvas course, but you don't have to submit anything.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So you're like, I don't really care for this one thing. That's so sick. So we're going to come full circle. So that Steve Jobs Audible thing I was talking about, like he went to like one of the most premium colleges out west, and he's like, dude, my schedule fucking blows. Like, these classes suck. I don't want to take these. I just want to take what I'm interested in. So he ended up like dropping out, but only like attending the classes like he cared about. So just like auditing them.
Right.
And he's like, yep, I learned what I wanted to learn. See you guys. Like,
Yep.
he didn't get a degree or anything. I mean, maybe he does later down the road, but what was cool is by the time he was 26, he was worth over $250 million.
That's insane.
I'm like, that's nuts. I'm 22. What have I done? Right? Like what genius am I? But also, the fact remains is his parents were a lawyer and a doctor, biologically. But he was adopted by 2 high school dropouts. So it's very interesting. So basically, they conformed their life to fit his needs. So he was born by people with very high IQs. And by the time he was in 2nd grade, he was like testing at a sophomore high school level.
That's insane.
And I'm like, you're a psychopath, dude. But he was very interested in electronics and stuff. And it was so super sick. I love the story and everything. But basically, he's like, school is boring. I'm just not going to go anymore unless you put me in private school or something where they actually challenge you. And his parents were like, Steve, we just can't afford that. He's like, that sucks. I guess I'm not going to school. They're so like, fine. So then they basically almost went bankrupt because he wanted to go to a better school. They moved right outside like Silicon Valley in like one of the nice suburbs, whatever, and put him in a private school. And he went to school. That's how he met like some of the, I think he met somebody who knew Wozniak in high school or whatever. And it's like, hey, you need to get together with this guy. So it's, I don't want to say too much more because like if you actually do want to listen to it, I totally recommend it. It's a great one. That and then the Elon Musk one. I think I just like seeing how stuff started because not that I'm trying to be one of the top, because I feel like a lot of people hate on these people for their innovative ideas. It's like, well, why does Jeff Bezos get a fly to the moon while some people can't, are just living paycheck to paycheck? And it's like, well, Jeff Bezos also sacrificed a lot to get to where he is.
Right.
So did Elon Musk. I mean, Elon Musk, I'm not going to spoil every audiobook I have, but one thing he did is he just got so fed up with his family because they were living in Canada. So his parents were immigrants to the United States, and once his dad's job didn't work out for him, they moved back over to South Africa, had Elon Musk there, they moved to Canada. I don't know the time frame of all this, but by the time Elon Musk was 17, he's like, well, I want to go to the United States. And parents are like, well, we can't just, get up and leave, right? Because, we have stable jobs here, and that's just how it is. And he's like, well, fine, I'm going to go live with Aunt May, something. Because she lives in Minnesota, right over the border. So he goes to Minnesota where he thinks Aunt May is. And Aunt May moved. No one told him. So he's just homeless, living on the street, trying to get it figured out. Like, you tell me someone else who freaking did that, dude. Like Elon Musk, I have a lot of respect for him. Just people are like, oh, well, he's trying to buy everything. It's like, sure, he may not have, been super successful with Twitter, but he tried.
Yep.
He tried. Like, people hate people for trying something and not working out. It's like, well, what have you done?
Right.
It's like, you're just the best quote. You know Gary Vee?
I don't.
That's another good motivator. I love him. He's very, very positive with his stuff. I'll show you after the podcast.
Okay.
But he's like, you won't get happiness from just shitting on someone.
Right.
And I'm like, I love that quote. That's one of my favorite quotes of all time for this year. And I actually put that on my Snapchat story, and a couple people were like, that's actually kind of true. It's like people are so quick to, kick someone while they're down.
Right.
And it's like, well, is that productive for you? I don't know. That's, I'm not going to say I'm not guilty of doing something like that. I'm human. I've made errors too,
right.
Just like everybody else. But all you can do is try to be better than you were yesterday. That's
right.
all you can do.
Right. And it's a really important thing to consider. I recently heard this quote. I guess it wasn't a quote. It was more just a whole entire phrase. And it stuck with me. So over this break, there were just a couple different things happening throughout my life, and it made me think about things a little bit differently. I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit negative towards some things. And I was just putting a lot of negative energy into one specific thing. And I thought, this isn't right. I'm not really solving anything. Anyways, so I was listening to a specific podcast. So this podcast, it's a personal health or personal growth and mental care podcast.
Is this the Jay Shetty guy
Yes,
you showed me?
yes. So I've been following him for a couple of years, and interesting enough, he went on a journey to become a monk, and then now he's a life coach. So he's a very interesting individual. I really like his ideas and the guests he brings on to his podcast. But that's besides the point. On one of his podcasts, he brought in a guest, and they were just talking about going through a specific struggle, like whether it was self-wrought or whether it was something that happened around you and it just affected you. And actually, a good example of this is if you're in a really bad spot in your job, like you really just don't like your job. So instead of thinking, oh, I really hate my job, I'm forced to go here every day, I have to do this, but I need to live and make money, instead of that negative energy, be like, okay, this is just a stepping stone. While I'm thinking about these things, instead of being negative about it, I'm just going to say, I'm going to work on these things that I have to work on, and at the same time, I'm going to put that negative energy towards something positive and think about how do I escape this situation and go to something better. So where that went was, if I'm fixated on something that's just draining, I'm putting a lot of energy into that, which is what's making me drain. So what if I, instead of draining myself, put that same energy into something worthwhile that'll help me grow? What's going to happen? Because think about something that happened to you and put yourself back into that situation. And I'm sorry for doing that. Think about how much negative energy happened at that situation and put into perspective, if you were to put that same energy somewhere else that will help you push further, what would have happened and how would have that happened? Like, well, it's the same thing, but redirection. So that stuck with me a lot.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like I'd say the darkest part of my life, I'm not going to disclose on the podcast, but I really did try to take some of that negative energy and put it into something positive. Like, I would be like just writing lyrics and stuff, and I probably wrote probably some of the best lyrics when I was just like going through hell mentally. But it's like I haven't wrote lyrics since like 2020, 2021, and I'm like, well, there goes that. But it was like people were like, oh, you I don't know if you listen to like rap at all, but people were like, oh, you write a lot like NF would, the rapper. He's
Right.
very mainstream with it now. He is, but at the time that was like who I was really influenced by. Like, he didn't cuss or anything in his raps or anything. Like, he was very, I wouldn't say he's Christian based, but he's very soul motivated. And that's how I was feeling at the time. So I was writing a lot of stuff that just kind of like felt like his flow, I guess. But I never really got on a microphone or really did anything. I'm like, dude, I know I can't rap. This is stereotypical. I'm white. Like, it's just not in my blood, man. But I just don't have that knack for it. It's like I like listening to some rap and stuff, but most of my skill is just in guitar or whatever. I'm just like, I'm not gonna try and diversify my musical skill here. I'd rather take that time and master something.
Mm-hmm.
And I still haven't hit that 10,000 hour mark yet, but someday I think it'd be sick. I don't know. Like, dude, I feel going on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, all this stuff, there are so much better guitarists out there, and I'm just like, what am I doing? They're over here doing like sweep picking, like going. Like, sweep picking is like where you go through X amount of strings in just a sweeping motion, then you bring it back up. But you're not going dun 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 dun. You're going da 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 da.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's freaking nuts. And I'm trying to get that coordination down. Like, it's something I practice like maybe twice, 3 times a week for about 10 minutes each. But it's something. There's so much stuff. But I feel like, it is 3:52. We're scheduled till 4. Is there any closing statements we want to, or any closing subject?
I'll actually close with some advice.
Okay, this is awesome. Okay.
So we all have different experiences, right? And that just doesn't mean that just because one person had a much more of an apparent troubling time does not mean that you didn't go through something just because it wasn't as bad. That's not good, right? So the idea here that I'm trying to portray is we're all gonna suffer anyway through life, and just because one suffering's greater than the other does not mean that it's invalidated. You have to focus on yourself too, right? So with that being said, don't be afraid to try new things within reason. Like, I'm not saying just go ahead and like sniff anything white that you can find. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if something scares you in a good way, go for it. Because who knows? You might discover something about yourself that you didn't know before, and then you might also just find out that maybe, hey, this wasn't something fit for you, so maybe I can just redirect my energy somewhere else. So just don't be afraid to try new things within reason, and just live your life. Like, don't try not to be peer pressured into doing things in order to get that experience that you're already like, oh, I should do this. Like, peer pressure isn't really the best of things. So the advice is don't be afraid to push yourself towards something greater while forgetting the first step. Because in order to get to the top of the mountain, you do have to start climbing at the base of the grass. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with that because, you know, people think a lot of big picture, but to make up that big picture, you have all, for metaphor, pixels. You have to figure out, well, what colors am I going to need for this picture? How big is the picture going to be? You know, you got to figure out all these different things for, like, let's say the smart home project. I'm going to be like, well, how am I going to pitch this shit to people, right? You know, I'm like, well, data mining is over $1 trillion industry, and this was back in 2018. And stuff's only getting more and more intrusive with data collecting. I mean, they have so many methods now. It's like you have TikTok literally banned being on federal agents' phones. You can't even, I'm sure some of our friends that have clearance. Do you have clearance?
I don't.
I remember talking to one of our mutual friends, and then they were saying to you that you had to get clearance for something.
If I wanted to work somewhere, yeah, but not generally.
Not actively, okay.
No.
Okay. But since they have clearance, they can't have TikTok on their phone because it generates 3 gigabytes of metadata a day. 3 gigabytes.
That's insane.
You know how much data that is?
A lot.
3 gigabytes per day. Our phones, more than likely not, don't have more than 512 gigabytes. So you're saying within half a year that would be taken up just if it was all localized. So to put that in perspective, I mean, that's the average size average for like the larger amount of data. Like my phone, I think is just 256, and I'd say the average is 128 now. But that's a lot of 3 gigabytes, and then you have how many X amount of users a day. And how I was told it worked, it was just collecting everything you're doing on your phone and shipping it as a data package back. So they're seeing everything you're doing from, like, well, I don't care. I don't know. That's my red flag, I guess. I guess that's the red flag I'll end on. Don't watch TikTok, but please subscribe and everything. Just don't do what I do. Don't succumb to the dopamine hits. But yeah, this has been Unplugged and Muted with the lovely guest Ahmed Nazar.
Well, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it very much as well too. This has been sponsored by Gawa Beans. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll end on that note.